Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and join our community. It's free, and you'll never miss new stories and adventures we share. The room is dark enough to seem infinite and quiet enough to feel like a sea before the wind, and in that soft black, a single sound begins to shape the night. A measured inhalation that draws the world closer, and a measured exhalation that rolls it gently away. The breath of a man who turned himself into armor to survive his own fire. The breath of a legend that still sounds like a tide returning to shore. And you can let your own lungs copy that rhythm as if you were learning a lullaby you somehow always knew. Because tonight, we will follow that breath through the hidden corridors of a life, starting with a spark and ending with a quiet that is not an ending at all, but a place where stars learn to whisper. There is a story beneath the mask, a human echo curled inside the iron, and if you listen slowly, you can hear how the memories gather like embers at the base of the dark, gathering warmth without flame, patient and steady, waiting for you to draw near. The sands are still in the distance, a boy's shadow long on Tatooine, where the sky is a bowl of cold blue that tips into violet at dusk, and his hands are small, but clever and kind. The sort of hands that coax machines into purring and make broken things remember what they were built for. And he looks up when the ships pass, because something inside him answers even before he knows the language of engines, even before he can name the weight that future days will place on his chest. The same chest that will one day carry a needlework of scars and gears, and that faithful metronome that tells the galaxy he has arrived. The temple halls are waiting in another corner of time, cool and tall and lit like a star field arranged by gentle minds, a place where silence is meant to teach peace, but can by accident teach loneliness, where rules try to wrap themselves around a soul that keeps outgrowing the fabric. And somewhere in those halls, a boy learns to bury his storms beneath the surface of a calm voice, the way a lake learns to look still while depths turn with unseen currents, and every lesson in letting go sits next to a secret lesson in how tightly the heart can cling when it is afraid, because fear is a patient teacher and it speaks fluently in dreams. There is a room in the city where the war does not fit, a golden edge of afternoon where laughter hides like a candle flame cupped against the wind. And in that room, two people keep a promise alive by not naming it too loudly. Love learning to walk quietly between oaths, a soft arithmetic of sacrifices made in advance. And you might hear the first quiet lie tell itself that secrecy is the safest cradle, a gentle lie that will grow teeth later. But for now, the light is warm and the faces are young, and hope is a simple word that tastes like honey and stays on the tongue. Battles arrive as maps and schedules, then as aches along the spine, then as a skill that feels like a duty and a duty that feels like breath. Victories counting themselves like beads, while something inside counts losses that no one else can see. And the line between protecting and holding tight becomes thin as thread. The kind of thread that prophecy pretends to tie into a bow while actually winding around the wrist. And each night, when the lights dim, the visions come to sit on the edge of the bed, urgent and pale and smelling of iron. And the future leans close and says, "It can be changed if only you will pay in just the right currency, in just the right moment." And there is always someone nearby who smiles as if kindness were a cloak and tells you that you are owed happiness for all you have given, that you should not have to lose what you love to the same cold that took your childhood, that all power wants is to keep what is precious, safe. And in the quiet that follows, the word safe begins to sound like a room with locked windows. A door opens, and a night begins that will break like glass across the floor. And footsteps echo in a place that once taught mercy but can only offer shadow now. And the breath inside the chest is steady because the mind has decided to be a knife. Knives do not shake, not until afterward, and afterward comes quickly as heat, and heat becomes ash, and ash becomes a shore that a man will stand on again and again in memory, touching the wound the way one touches a bruise to learn whether it is still there. The mask is born under white light that has no sunlight in it, born with the sure hands of strangers and the uncertain soul of the man who will wear it. And when it seals, you can imagine the world narrowing and then widening, a tunnel and then a horizon, and the first breath lands like the first step on foreign soil, heavy and necessary, and the second breath is acceptance dressed like survival, and the third is a promise, and you can hear the promise in your own breathing now as you lie there, slow and soft, matching the count that rises and falls like a tide that will carry us down halls where lights turn on at the sight of him, down bridges where red meets blue and patience meets anger, down corridors of starships that remember the sound of his boots, and through castles built on wounds, because sometimes the only way to live with pain is to give it architecture. He will hunt and command and build and break and lift and drop. But beneath the motions there is a simpler truth that hides like a moon behind thin cloud, that nothing he conquers is louder than the memory of what he could not save, that every corridor he clears is an argument with the boy who smiled up at ships and wanted the sky to be kind, that every duel is a sermon, and every victory a silence that waits for a question he cannot ask. And even in the moments when power looks like certainty, you can see the flicker of a question at the edge of the visor, where an eye once searched for someone who believed in him first. There will be meetings with ghosts and with friends who became mirrors, and masks that crack open like a shell to let a voice come out unfiltered for a heartbeat. And there will be a name said like a prayer, and like a challenge, and like an invitation to share a burden that was too heavy to carry alone. And there will be lightning, and there will be a choice made not for victory, but for weightless relief. And the breath that once sounded like a sentence will for a moment sound like a release. And a son will kneel in smoke and ask for nothing more than a face, and a father will give it, and the galaxy will for a second forget how to be loud, and the stars will hold their own breath the way you are holding yours now without strain. Gentle and easy, letting the rhythm do the work. After the fire, after the sorrow, after the stories have been told enough times to become doorways that open by themselves, there are still side rooms no one walks through, small chambers of memory where he kept things even from himself, tokens and habits and little rituals that made the darkness livable. And we will walk those rooms together by candlelight, not to judge but to understand, not to reopen ache but to warm it until it loosens. And as you listen, the night can soften around you like cloth, and the bed can feel like a ship riding a calm sea, and your own thoughts can move like a slow procession across a quiet bridge. Tonight, our purpose is to turn the legend gently in our hands and feel the human weight of it, to learn how a person can become a mask without disappearing, and how a mask can one day become a window, and to notice the small mercies in the thick of the shadow, because mercy is a low flame that rarely shows in the battle reports, but often keeps someone alive long enough to find a different dawn. And if the word dawn makes your chest feel lighter. Then let it. Let the promise of morning fold itself into your ribs while we move deeper into the dark, where secrets turn into meanings and meanings become something softer than forgiveness and sturdier than regret, something like recognition, something like a name spoken with warmth. Each step we take will be slow, and each secret will arrive without sharp corners. And when we leave a room, we will set its lights to dim rather than out, so you can come back later if your dreams want to visit. And all you have to do for now is keep breathing with the story, in and out, while the ember at the center of him and the ember at the center of you glow without hurry, while the tide keeps time on the shore of sleep, while echoes recede down long halls and become the gentlest kind of hush. And in that hush you can rest as the first chapter waits at the door, ready to open onto sand and sky and a small boy looking up. Because the night is long enough for the whole journey and kind enough to carry you comfortably, and every secret we uncover will be a cushion under your head, and every truth we name will be a blanket across your shoulders, and the breath that began our path will guide us through it all until the stars feel close enough to touch. The night over Tatooine does not end so much as thin, something like a name spoken with warmth. Each step we take will be slow, and each secret will arrive without sharp corners. And when we leave a room, we will set its lights to dim rather than out, so you can come back later if your dreams want to visit. And all you have to do for now is keep breathing with the story, in and out, while the ember at the center of him and the ember at the center of you glow without hurry, while the tide keeps time on the shore of sleep, while echoes recede down long halls and become the gentlest kind of hush. And in that hush you can rest as the first chapter waits at the door, ready to open onto sand and sky and a small boy looking up. Because the night is long enough for the whole journey and kind enough to carry you comfortably, and every secret we uncover will be a cushion under your head, and the stars dimming like tired eyes while the dunes hold their breath. And in that gentle hour, a boy lies awake on a pallet that smells faintly of sun-baked cloth and machine oil, listening to the silence the way a mechanic listens. Every truth we name will be a blanket across your shoulders, and the breath that began our path will guide us through it all until the stars feel close enough to touch. The night over Tatooine does not end so much as thin for a fault, testing for a sound that shouldn't be there, and a sound that should. The stars dimming like tired eyes while the dunes hold their breath. And in that gentle hour, a boy lies awake on a pallet that smells faintly of sun-baked cloth and machine oil, listening to the silence the way a mechanic listens for a fault, testing for a sound that shouldn't be there, and a sound that should. Something like a name spoken with warmth. Each step we take will be slow, and each secret will arrive without sharp corners. And when we leave a room, we will set its lights to dim rather than out, so you can come back later if your dreams want to visit. And all you have to do for now is keep breathing with the story, in and out, while the ember at the center of him and the ember at the center of you glow without hurry, while the tide keeps time on the shore of sleep, while echoes recede down long halls and become the gentlest kind of hush. And in that hush you can rest as the first chapter waits at the door, ready to open onto sand and sky and a small boy looking up. Because the night is long enough for the whole journey and kind enough to carry you comfortably, and every secret we uncover will be a cushion under your head, and every truth we name will be a blanket across your shoulders, and the breath that began our path will guide us through it all until the stars feel close enough to touch. The night over Tatooine does not end so much as thin, the stars dimming like tired eyes while the dunes hold their breath. And in that gentle hour, a boy lies awake on a pallet that smells faintly of sun-baked cloth and machine oil, listening to the silence the way a mechanic listens for a fault, testing for a sound that shouldn't be there and a sound that should. Out into a room like a second cloak. He can tell when a bargain will go thin before the first number is named, and he can feel when someone is about to be cruel the way desert creatures feel an earthquake before the first rumble. Sometimes he steps between cruelty and its target, not because he's brave, though he is, but because something inside him cannot bear a crooked line when he can see the straight one that would cost him little to draw. But there is a line he cannot erase, not with charm nor wit nor skill. The line that says some people own other people here, that future and safety and leaving are currencies held in someone else's palm. And so he returns, again and again, to the only map he can make, a map of effort that points outward. Build the droid, learn the parts, race the engines, save the credits, save more credits, make yourself so useful that the future has to open because the present cannot hold you. At night, he drinks water and imagines the taste changing to something like rain, and he smiles at the ceiling as if the ceiling were a low sky that might answer. He is quick with the pod racer controls in a way that feels like remembering rather than learning, as if his hands have done this before in a different story and his body is catching up to its own rumor. Speed speaks to him in a grammar of pressure and drift, of how a fraction earlier here makes the whole next dozen heartbeats easier, of how there is a point inside each risk where the world balances, and if you lean exactly there, you skim rather than fall. He rides the balance beam of danger because danger offers something no one else seems willing to hand him. A chance to move so fast the cage can't keep up. The roar, the wind, the ribbon, of course, twisting like a challenge is not an escape only. It is a conversation with something vast and nameless that nevertheless cares enough to answer him true. And when he wins a small win, he brings that home not as bragging, but as proof that the straight line exists. That the right touch at the right moment can make a stubborn world behave. He is generous with those proofs, and sometimes sharp with them too. When another child brags loudly and unfairly, Anakin's kindness goes flinty, his words coming quick and precise as a tool that knows the weak bolt. He apologizes afterward when he sees the hurt, then swears to himself that next time he'll be gentler. And then the next time arrives in a new shape, and he fails for a heartbeat and learns again. People talk about anger as if it grows later, but the truth is softer and stranger. It lives in him as a sense of justice that runs hot, as a refusal to see harm and keep his mouth shut, as a burning that believes it can be water if only someone hands it the right vessel. Shmi knows both his sweetness and his heat. She sees him look up at the sky with the patience of a hunter and the impatience of a sunrise, and she folds her love around him like a garment with deep pockets, places where he can put the heavy pieces he can't carry openly. She does not lie to him about the world, but she tells him stories about the kinds of people he can decide to be inside it, and he keeps those stories as if they were tools with names. The wrench called mercy, the calibrator called humor, the spool of wire called weight. Later there will be others: resolve, forgive, let go. But for now, the first three are enough most days, and when they are not, when the shop keeps him late, or a customer's laugh digs at the bone, or he sees a friend stumble under a load and no one moves. His eyes do a bright, dangerous thing, and he steps forward sooner than caution would prefer. Afterwards, alone, he thinks about that brightness with both pride and worry. And the worry is not about getting in trouble. Trouble is sand underfoot here, constant. But about whether the part of him that moves fast will forget to bring along the part of him that sees people clearly and loves them soft. He fears, without naming it, that speed without sight becomes harm, and he promises himself again in the dark to keep the two together. The conversation that follows is gentle and full of ordinary talk, parts and prices, routes and risks, but beneath it runs a second conversation, quieter and truer. Would you like to learn how to name the thing you already do? Would you like to see a sky that answers when you call it? Would you like to belong to a group that says the word duty as if it had warmth in it? The boy answers both conversations with versions of yes, and then with a hesitation that tastes like fear, because the map of leaving overlays the map of staying, and both maps have his mother in them. Shmi steps into the moment in exactly the way a mother who sees both storm and harbor steps. She takes a breath. She takes his hand. She looks at the strangers, and she tries to be the kind of brave that lets a loved one go. The boy wants to argue for a future that keeps everything, safety and proximity and freedom and belonging. And he almost says the small, impossible wish out loud. Take us both. Then he swallows because wishes need timing, and he has learned timing from engines, and he thinks perhaps there will be a race soon whose prize is large enough to purchase a life. The strangers leave him with a question instead of an order, and he holds the question like a glowing stone that doesn't burn, turning it over while he eats, while he works, while he lies awake and listens to the desert counting dot. And when at last the racers line up and the long, hot ribbon, of course, stretches like a dare into the shimmer, he straps in with a solemnity that would look like prayer if he knew how to pray, his fingers light on the throttles, his body remembering a conversation the wind taught him. The roar rises, the world narrows. The corners arrive like questions he loves to answer, and he answers all but one, the final one that is not about speed at all, but about who you are when you pass the finish. He is still a boy when he crosses, and yet in some quiet way older than a minute ago, because sometimes winning is not about beating others, but about choosing a shape for your life and then bearing it. Dust settles on his lips like a blessing. The crowd's shout is a storm that loves him for a moment. In the quiet after, when the strangers return, his eyes are bright with the relief of someone who has proven a point to the universe and can now point to the proof. The point is simple. The straight line exists. The next point is harder. Straight lines don't always lead where you think, and sometimes the quickest way to the sky is through a door that will teach you how to walk slowly. He looks at his mother, and she nods, and the nod is both permission and heartbreak, and he feels both and does not break. The night after he says yes, he lies awake and listens to the stars with a new certainty, as if they are now letters in an alphabet he will be taught to read. He does not know yet that the alphabet contains warnings as well as wonders. He knows only that the tide in his chest has turned toward elsewhere, that the ember of wanting has found air. And when the transport lifts tomorrow and the desert lays down its long gold like a hug, he will press his hands to the viewport and whisper thanks to a place that taught him how to hear the world, because he will need that hearing in every quiet hall ahead, where silence will mean both peace and test. In the morning, he will step onto stone that shines like night and learn to quiet his storms without killing them. But for now, he sleeps for an hour with a smile that belongs equally to a child and to the promise that shaped him, and the breath that steadied him in the dark steadies again as the chapter turns toward cool corridors and lamps that look like constellations arranged by careful hands. The first step off the sand feels like stepping into shadowed water, a cool that climbs the ankles and keeps going until even the scalp feels different. And the boy who once listened to engines finds himself listening to a building large enough to have a heartbeat. The temple does not breathe, not the way a body does, yet in the hush before sunrise, the halls seem to fill and empty with a tide of quiet, long corridors pulling sound toward their mouths and letting it go again. Lights float like domesticated stars, set at patient intervals, and the floor is so clean it almost refuses footprints. He has never known a place where silence meant safety, only a pause before the next demand, and so he walks soft, waiting for the trap that is really a ritual, the order that is really an invitation. And when none arrives, when only the gentle shuffle of robes passes by and a murmured greeting leaves a warmth behind, he begins to imagine that a rule can be a blanket if woven by the right hands. He holds his breath without meaning to, then lets it go, hears it echo in the high space, and smiles because it does not sound out of place here. The desert taught him to hear danger and to hurry. The temple asks him to hear himself and not hurry. That is its first lesson, and it is almost too strange to accept. Master after master watches him the way the morning watches a window, curious and open and perhaps a little uncertain how to hold so much sun. When they say prophecy near him, they say it gently, as if a loud voice might put a crack in something made of thin glass. He is told that the galaxy turns on currents deeper than trade routes, and that sometimes a life is braided into those currents like a thread chosen for color and strength. People say chosen in so many ways here, as a hope, as a warning, as if it were a word that could mean ease and burden at once. He did not ask to be a thread in any tapestry, only to be a hand that fixes what is broken. But he also loves the idea that his skill sits inside a pattern grander than luck. The idea warms him. It also weighs him. He keeps both feelings, one in each palm, and tries not to clench. Routine unspools like a long ribbon, and he learns to let it wrap around him without tying knots. He wakes to bells that do not sound like alarms, and to windows that pour in sky, as if the sky had been tamed. He eats with others who move their bowls with a care that is not fear, but respect, as if every small act can be a practice round for peace. He sits in rooms where the floor seems to invite stillness, sits until stillness feels less like being asked not to move and more like being allowed to rest. The Force is given a name here, not the whisper in the skin or the sudden correct guess, but a field that likes cooperation, a presence that brightens when greeted. Under patient guidance, he learns to breathe as if breath were a key that fits every lock, to listen as if listening were a form of touching that leaves nothing smudged. He holds a training remote that hums and blinks, and he does not swat at its darts with panic. He speaks to them with timing, and they answer with absence. There are forms to learn, arcs the blade should draw, ways to step so the body's weight becomes kindness to the body. He finds joy in the geometry of it. He finds caution in the fact that he is so good so quickly. He has always been good quickly. He decides that this time he will also be slow. They ask him to release. The word comes up again and again, like a lantern in every room, and at first he thinks they mean forget, and he refuses quietly because forgetting his mother would be a betrayal that would make every victory taste like rust. Then someone kind with eyes like patient water tells him that release is not erasing what you love. It is choosing not to grip it so hard that it cannot breathe. He tries. He tries in the way a person tries to sleep on a night when tomorrow may bring a letter. He finds that release is easier in the training halls and harder in the dormitory. Easier when a master is counting, and harder when the lights are out and memory settles on the pillow like a loyal animal. He bargains with himself, gives the night to memory and the morning to practice, and tells no one that sometimes dawn catches him still awake, counting breaths in multiples of 10, because the higher numbers are harder and therefore promise a stronger bridge to cross. The prophecy lives here as a story the Order tells itself about balance, about a scale that has been listing for too long, about a shadow that has learned to make copies. He hears words like bring and restore, and believes them to be verbs that can be learned the way any technique can be learned. He asks, in the polite syntax of a student, what balance means when someone you love is at stake, and the master smiles in a way that is both proud and sad, and says that balance means everyone you love is at stake, and you love them all, including the ones you do not know yet, including the future. He nods as if this answer fits perfectly. Inside, a small voice raises a hand and asks whether that means no one gets to be special. He tells the voice to sit quietly and watch. Students become friends in shy increments, then in bold ones. He races in courtyards without engines and finds he can enjoy speed without risk, laughter arriving in clean waves that break and leave the stone bright. He leans over datapads with others, sharing the thrill of a line finally understood, of a pattern appearing where there had been only static. He is sometimes too sharp in his corrections, then quick to soften, and people forgive him because they can feel how much he wants to be good. He is sometimes too eager to finish first, then learns to hold back, not as a performance, but as a new skill. The art of letting someone else have the center and discovering it does not diminish his light. He treats this discovery like a tool he will need. He is right. Yet under the lessons, under the laughter, there is a coil of wanting that remains warm. He wants to be seen by the ones who saw him before this place. He wants to bring proof to a woman who folded his storms in her palms. In the meditation hall, he sometimes sees her as if she sat across from him, the lines at the corners of her eyes softer because she is not squinting into glare, and he smiles without moving his mouth, and the vision smiles back. He tells no one, because here visions are not toys, and because he knows that sometimes what you hold close is safer than what you show. This is the beginning of the warm lie, not a single sentence spoken aloud, but a habit of comfort that keeps certain truths in pockets. He tells himself that privacy is respect. He is not wrong. He is also not entirely right. A master speaks of attachment as a knot that can tighten until the limb goes numb. The boy pictures cords and arteries, remembers the feel of a collar without touching it, and thinks, surely the problem is the knot, not the cord. Surely the answer is learning to tie better. The Order nods politely at his metaphor and then repeats, gently, that all knots can become nooses in a storm. He hears. He really hears, but he keeps a small practice of knot work in the back of his mind. What if there exists a way to hold with so much care that nothing bruises? He will test this theory later with love. He will be proud of the craft even when it fails. There are rooms in the temple where history sits as if it were a living audience. Holocrons hum in their racks and glow when woken, and voices speak from them with the authority of people who learned their lessons in harsher weather and left them here so that others could be spared some of the frost. He leans toward those voices the way he leans toward an engine about to catch, and he feels the pleasure of continuity, of being part of a line that is not broken for 1,000 years. He also feels the itch that comes when a line is drawn so straight and so long that it seems to deny bends, forks, new paths. He tries not to scratch the itch. He tries to be grateful for the road. Gratitude works most of the time. Restlessness visits anyway, polite at first, more insistent when the stars look particularly close. He learns to build as well as to swing. A lightsaber is a conversation with a crystal that would rather sing than shout, a long coaxing where patience is not optional. He closes his eyes and feels for the tone that matches his own, surprised to discover that even here, inside a weapon, the work is the same as the shop. Listening closely enough that the part tells you how to spare its strain. When the blade finally blooms in his hand, it feels less like a trophy and more like a vow to hold and not misuse. He is told that the color says something about him. He wonders what. He decides he will learn what it says by paying attention to how it feels to hold. He is tired of other people's names for him. He wants to learn his own. Letters arrive in his life with increasing regularity, some official, some not. And the unofficial ones carry warmth that is heavy enough to bend the day toward a golden hour. He reads in quiet corners and lets himself be two people at once. The student who tilts his head at a koan, the friend who smiles at a secret joke, the son who still hears the desert at night even when the city wraps the sky in lights. He tells himself that being two people is a temporary condition while the paths merge, that he is not being divided but being widened, that soon he will be someone who can stand in any room with all his names at once. The warm lie nods and sits closer, offering a blanket. He accepts. He is not cold. He wraps up anyway. Lessons in letting go become lessons in choosing. If you place your hand on the present moment, he is told, you do not need to clutch the next. He places his hand on the present moment dutifully, then looks over its shoulder with a speed he hopes no one sees. He is praised for his focus. He is praised for his compassion. He is praised for his composure on training missions that would have frightened him not long ago. Praise makes him straighten with pleasure, then blush with embarrassment at his own pleasure, then resolve to want praise less. Self-correction becomes a pastime. It is exhausting. He hides the exhaustion because he believes the lesson must be good if it is difficult. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes it is simply difficult. When war rumors rise at the edges, they arrive as distant thunder the temple hears without flinching. Peacekeepers prepare in the way gardeners prepare for drought, not eager for the work yet calm about how to do it. He asks questions about lines and limits. He is told that the order serves the whole, and that sometimes serving the whole means stepping into storms. He nods again and cannot help the thrill that runs along his bones at the thought that he will be useful in a way the shop could never allow. Usefulness is a word that warms him. It also tempts him toward lines he cannot yet see. He will learn them by touching them, which is an honest way to learn and a dangerous one. In the meditative garden, he practices a small, private ritual. He sits where a wind chime can make a thoughtful sound, and he thinks of the boy on the sand who counted his breaths with the desert, and of the woman who counted his breaths when he was smaller, and he says thank you without words. Gratitude is not release, not exactly, but it keeps the grip from becoming a fist. He watches an older knight bowed to a tree with the kind of humility that is not performance. And he thinks, I will be like that and still be me. The warm lie strokes his hair. The truth sits nearby, patient, not needing to be chosen today. The moment prophecy touches skin arrives with no trumpets, only a council chamber that smells of old wood and resolve. He is told plainly that some believe he may be the one to bring a scale back to level. He is told plainly that belief does not make a future, and that discipline does. That love for all must take precedence over love for one. That fear is the only true enemy, because it dresses in whatever clothes will get through the door. He hears, and somewhere a quiet defiance smiles. He has met fear before, and he has outraced it, outworked it, outwilled it. He believes he can make an agreement with fear. You may visit, but you may not move in. Fear, being fear, pretends to agree. Nights lengthen into a season of competence, and competence is addictive. He can feel himself becoming the version of the story that is easiest to tell, gifted, disciplined, tempered by training into something both bright and manageable. The parts of him that do not fit the story learn to sit quietly in the back row. They will not stay there, but for now they rest. He notices that the masters are kind, yes, and also busy, also human, also as attached to certain outcomes as anyone who has carried a tradition for longer than memory can count. He sees their preferences, their hesitations. He understands that even a luminous order casts shadows, and that sometimes a young person's edges get sanded too smooth. He decides to keep a corner of himself unpolished. He will call it honesty and check it for splinters, often. And then the day arrives when the temple's stillness shivers, not with threat, but with summons. A ship waits, war-beat distant, but inevitable, and his name carries new weight as it passes from mouth to mouth. He stands at the threshold, where stone gives way to sun, and for a heartbeat he can smell the sand of another life, rising faintly in the heat. He thinks of a promise to fix, to help, to change the angle of the world, so it works better for everyone who must live with it. He thinks of release, and of knots, and of a thread drawn through a tapestry that will not show its whole image until much later. He thinks of love, and of rules, and of the warm lie that says you can keep everything if you are clever and careful and strong enough. He breathes once, twice, in the rhythm the temple taught, and the desert confirmed. He steps forward, and the story moves with him, down the stairs, across the courtyard, into a ship that hums like a crystal finding its note. The door closes with a softness that feels like trust. The engines wake, the city lifts away, the starfield returns to being wild, and the boy with a blade and a letter in his pocket believes, with a sincerity that glows, that prophecy is simply another word for responsibility, and that he can carry it without dropping anything he loves. Somewhere out ahead, a dream sharpens its teeth. For now the breath is steady, the ember warm, the tide in his chest turned toward duty, and the echo of the temple's quiet remains in his ears as a promise he will try with all his strength to keep. Night learns his name again, but this time it speaks it with a tremor. Sleep does not come as a blanket, more like a curtain that breath pushes aside, draws closed, pushes aside. When it finally falls, the room tilts, and the dream arrives with the unstoppable logic of weather. White sheets, a face he loves gone chalk pale, hands that cannot find a pulse they would trade anything to feel. He wakes with a sound in his throat he swallows too late and sits upright, palms on his knees, counting as if numbers could be sandbags against a rising flood. The temple taught him to let images pass like clouds. These do not pass. They circle. Each night they return sooner, sharpened, detailed, learning his weak angles dot by day. He is as composed as a lesson plan. Missions, briefings, the clean joinery of strategy. He fits into it all like a tool made for its socket. But the quiet parts of the day grow edges. Light through a corridor window looks like an ECG line. The hum of a med-bay cradle sounds like a flat line. Even laughter, rare and welcome, stretches a little too thin over worry. He tells himself the visions are warnings, not sentences. Then the old calculation begins, the one he learned in Dust and Engines. If a problem can be solved, it must be solved. If a thing can be kept from breaking, it must be kept. Duty narrows into a single name dot. He tries the sanctioned paths first. Archives, counsel, the patient, careful talk that tastes like tea left too long. Useful, mild, not enough. The guidance is sincere and right in ways that feel wrong at the bone. Accept what comes, love without gripping, trust the wider weave. He nods, repeats the phrasing, practices release like a musician practices scales, and still the dream returns with teeth. Each failure to sleep chisels a new thought. If the rules cannot save her, perhaps they are only part of the map. A different voice enters the hall of his options, warmth wrapped in wisdom, admiration disguised as concern. It does not speak against compassion or justice, it admires them in him, amplifies them, then leans in where fear lives. There are arts not taught in public rooms. There are ways to bend what fate calls fixed. You would not be the first to balance love and order. The offer is never framed as betrayal. It is framed as fulfillment, of promise, of potential, of the very prophecy that named him. He hears himself answering with questions that are really steps. What cost? What guarantee? What must I learn? The door that opens does not slam. It glides. It looks like necessity, like maturity, like finally being honest about what he is willing to pay. He tells himself he is not choosing darkness. He is choosing light by a faster road, choosing to keep a life that the galaxy will need, choosing to refuse an outcome presented as inevitable by people who have made peace with loss because they have learned to survive it. He has learned to fix things instead. He confuses that gift with a mandate. He confuses a dream with a debt he must collect from the future. When he kneels in a room where the air feels denser than atmosphere, where words are careful and kind and crooked all at once, he believes he is bargaining with time. In truth, time is bargaining with him. He sets his breath to the rhythm that once soothed him and mistakes steadiness for certainty. Somewhere a lock turns, softly. Somewhere a boy who heard the stars promises them he will pay any price if they will be kind, then gets up, opens the door, and does not hear how quietly it clicks shut behind him. War arrives the way a long illness does, first as a rumor in the hall, then as a new schedule that everyone pretends is temporary, then as the only map left on the table. The first weeks taste like clarity. The lines are bright, the objectives clean, the briefings snug as gloves. He steps into command as if he were stepping back into a cockpit, body remembering, instincts already at speed, the force tightening around his attention the way a current tightens around a swimmer who finally strokes with it instead of against it. Victories come, small and then not small. He learns the topography of triumph, the sudden quiet after the last shot, the shuffle of medics, the clatter of collected weapons. the way soldiers look to him with relief and expectation in the same breath. He gives both what he can. He gives more than he should. Each success is a stitch. He does not see yet how the thread is pulling skin together over a wound that needs air. War is logistics, and he is good at logistics. He discovers he can think in corridors and supply chains, in fuel weights and time to arrival, in the human math of risk spread across a battalion so that losses do not crack in one place. He learns names, too many and not enough, and says them back to their owners as if naming were a shield. He eats quickly, sleeps badly, wakes to the same knot in the ribs that he tells himself is professional readiness. The temple's lessons do not vanish, they convert. Stillness becomes the few slow breaths he takes before a breach. Compassion becomes a faster extraction plan. Balance becomes a whiteboard with two columns: what we can save, what we cannot. He pretends the second column is only for pessimists and fills the first until the marker squeaks. The galaxy obliges his competence with harder tasks. He accepts them with the relief of a craftsman given a tool worthy of his hand. On the surface of this relief is confidence. Under it is a private plea. If I do this well enough, the dream will wake in my favor. He never says the plea aloud. He barely lets himself hear it. The skilled lie is a quiet colleague now, offering phrasing that makes the days fit together. Prioritization, triage, necessary force. He is not wrong. He is also, increasingly, someplace slightly adjacent to right. He watches how fear moves through a formation. It jerks heads at the wrong sounds, wastes rounds, makes men narrate disaster so loudly they cannot hear the present. And he thinks control is mercy. If they all move when I say fewer die, he is not wrong. He is also teaching himself a grammar where the verb to obey begins to conjugate as to love. The troop's affection for him is genuine. He earns it the old way, by taking the hardest shift and the narrowest corridor and the last seat on the evac. But affection becomes a lever, and levers multiply, and pressure feels like care when you're the one applying it for what you name as good. Loss does not present itself as tragedy first. Loss presents itself as a series of adjustments. A pilot who is always early is not early anymore. A medic laughs less. A sergeant forgets a ritual that used to steady him before he set the charge. He notices all of this with the same exactness he brings to wiring diagrams, and he fixes what can be fixed, rotates the pilot to a route with fewer variables, sends the medic to the quartermaster with a foolish errand that results in a new pair of boots, and, accidentally another medic's joke, takes the sergeant aside and teaches him a new ritual that requires only breath and a 3 count. These are good acts. He does so many of them that he becomes a net that catches falling lives before they hit the floor. Nets stretch, nets fray, nets are not floors. Some nights he sits beneath the belly of a gunship after the crew has gone and stares up at the plates as if the machine could talk back. He asks it silent questions anyway. What do you remember of me? When I tell you to bear more, do you break or do you bend? Is there a calculus by which I can carry every weight and still be a person rather than a function? The gunship has no words. It answers by reflecting his face back in chopped rectangles, a jigsaw with small pieces missing. He runs his hands along the seams of the hull to feel the places where repair fused old to new. He knows how to do that for metal. He does not yet know he is trying to do it for himself. He becomes adept at the compromise that tilts toward control. A local leader hesitates to commit resources. He reminds the leader of yesterday's rescue, lets gratitude turn into obligation under the lightest of hands. An ally commander wants to proceed with caution. He drafts a plan where caution looks like delay, and delay looks like loss. And loss looks like a failure, whose photo will find the allies superior. He knows how to make people see what he needs them to see, and he chooses the faces that convince them. The skilled lie does not require falsehood. It requires framing. He is a master framer now. He can put any fact in a room that makes it behave. The work is seductive. It feels like intelligence. It is. And yet it also sands away a margin where others might have said no to him. Had he given them the chance on the field, his body learns a shorthand that no longer asks kindly before it acts. He disarms as if plucking a thread, knocks aside as if dusting a table, slices only when the geometry declares it the lone line left. He is, in the phrase soldiers murmur with both awe and superstition, clean. Clean means efficient. Clean also means that blood doesn't stay on him long enough to tell him stories he might need to hear. Afterward, when the quiet comes, he feels the old ember and tells himself it is the glow of purpose, not of something slowly burning through a wick he cannot replace. Letters continue. Their warmth is oxygen. He reads between sorties and answers with paragraphs that are careful not to transmit too much of what the days smell like. He edits himself kindly. He says true things that are not the whole truth, because the whole truth would frighten a heart he wants only to warm. The warm lie has graduated to correspondence. It writes in a sweeter tone than he knows how to use on the field. He tells himself he is protecting, that the hardest parts can be carried by one back for two people. Protection looks like love in the dark. In daylight, it sometimes looks like isolation wearing armor, with a smile painted on the visor. Sleep thins. Visions thicken. He gauges them with the same instruments he uses on threat matrices: frequency rising, proximity closing, specificity sharpening, and grows more certain that passivity is complicity. He hears counsel that advises acceptance and hears, despite himself, surrender. He hears counsel that warns against fear and hears, despite himself, scolding. He hears one voice that never scolds, only marvels at his strength, and marveling feels like medicine. He does not notice the part where medicine becomes appetite. There are days he is gentle as ever. A frightened child under a transport. He lies flat beside them and tells a story about a desert sky he once knew until the child crawls into his arms without realizing they have chosen. A captured enemy shaking too hard to answer. He brings water and asks non-questions until the man remembers how to be a person before he remembers loyalty. He is not lost. He is not beyond return. He is simply walking, at speed, on a path that rewards the exact qualities that will harm him if they never learn how to stop. War loves men who do not stop. He begins to measure himself by results because the immediate world measures nothing else. This village stands. That battalion returns. Casualties lower than expected. Strategic value secured. He logs the numbers with a satisfaction that has no room for how they were acquired. And when a tremor of doubt tries to register, he clears it like noise on a channel. Doubt gets people hurt if it rides shotgun. He forgets that doubt when it rides quietly in the back, sometimes points out the cliff. Then a mission ends with success written in letters so large command can read them from orbit, and still a small, unnecessary cruelty occurs. the kind he would have once stepped between and now hears about only as a ripple afterward. He finds the soldier responsible and addresses it with formal precision. He speaks of standards and of who we are. The soldier nods, chastened, and leaves. Alone, he feels a pulse of anger, not at the cruelty, but at the fact that it happened out of his sight. Control is mercy, he reminds himself. He does not see the step he takes as he says it. The step from leading to owning, from guiding to deciding that the world should move at the speed and in the shape of his will, because that will prevent pain. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it simply delays it and changes its name. Dot. On a late watch, he stands on a platform that looks out over a grid of lights and thinks of the temple, of the way stillness used to mean safety. The grid blinks, the comms hiss, somewhere a medbay hums. He breathes the old count, and the breath comes back to him deeper, heavier, threaded now with the sound of engines spinning up at his command. The ember in his chest answers. He calls its heat dedication. He is not lying. He is also warming a place where the bargain will soon sit more comfortably. When the summons comes from that other voice, a briefing in a private room, a question asked, as if only he can carry the answer, he will be ready, not because he was weak, but because he was strong in a way that war rewards until strong becomes hard and hard becomes hunger that does not ask permission before it eats. For now, the tide is high. The echo of triumph fills the corridors, and in the quiet between alarms, he tells himself that if he keeps everyone safe long enough, the dream will have to choose mercy. He believes it. He believes it so well that the belief begins to sound like truth spoken by a friend, and the skilled lie, pleased with its apprentice, folds another detail neatly into place. Night does not arrive now so much as it is already waiting for him when he closes his eyes, a patient animal at the foot of the bed that lifts its head the moment the room goes still. The first visions had been sketches, a dim outline of a face he loves paling under a light that never warms, hands reaching, help that doesn't arrive. Now they come with the texture of touch, linen dragging across skin, the faint medicinal bite in the air, a monitor's tired rhythm deciding it will not rise again. He wakes exactly when the breath stops in the dream, always there, always late, and the helplessness is a cold that does not melt with morning. The temple taught him to let images pass like weather. These weather systems park over the same small hospital room and do not move on. He tries the practices faithfully. He counts, he releases, he names the fear and watches it. It does not shrink. He begins to suspect that some storms require you to walk into them. By day, he is everything the records would praise. Briefings click, plans align. His voice steadies men whose hands shake. When the moment of action arrives, he is the first to step forward, the last to leave, and the column knows the difference between courage and theatrics. But the hours between tasks grow sharp. Sunlight through a viewport turns into a slash of white that looks like a sheet. The slow pulse of a status light becomes a heartbeat that falters. Someone laughs, a bright sound, and it stretches too thin in the air, like a smile worn one day past comfort. He tells himself, makes himself tell himself, that the visions are warnings, not verdicts, and warnings are invitations to act. If there is a door, then there is a key. If there is a key, then there is a way through. He has been finding ways through since he could reach a toolkit. He tries the practices faithfully. He counts, he releases, he names the fear and watches it. It does not shrink. He begins to suspect that some storms require you to walk into them. By day, he is everything the records would praise. Briefings click, plans align. His voice steadies men whose hands shake. When the moment of action arrives, he is the first to step forward, the last to leave, and the column knows the difference between courage and theatrics. But the hours between tasks grow sharp. Sunlight through a viewport turns into a slash of white that looks like a sheet. The slow pulse of a status light becomes a heartbeat that falters. Someone laughs, a bright sound, and it stretches too thin in the air, like a smile worn one day past comfort. He makes himself tell himself that the visions are warnings, not verdicts, and warnings are invitations to act. If there is a door, then there is a key. If there is a key, then there is a way through. He has been finding ways through since he could reach a toolkit. He goes first to the places that make sense. The archives, the council chamber, the quiet garden where advice grows slow and true. Masters talk to him about fear's disguises, about how love and terror can share the same voice if you listen only for urgency, about how control feels like compassion when you are strong. He goes first to the places that make sense. The archives, the council chamber, the quiet garden where advice grows slow and true. Masters talk to him about fear's disguises, about how love and terror can share the same voice if you listen only for urgency, about how control feels like compassion when you are strong. Books. The sentence is a gentle hand on a door that has never quite been visible until now. He feels the latch give. He asks the good questions first. What cost? What certainty? What shape does the path take so he can measure how far it bends? The answers are shaped like sympathy. Cost? Yes. But you have paid so much already. Certainty? No. But probabilities you can tilt. As for the path, it is the same hallway you already walk, only with a hidden passage that lets you reach the room in time. None of it is framed as disobedience. It is framed as fulfillment. Of promise, of prophecy, of the responsibility everyone said might be his. If a thread is told it will bring the weave into balance, how wicked is it for that thread to pass through a needle that others find too sharp? He starts to move in two tempos. In public, the measured pace of the order, learn, consider, decide together, act. In private, a quicker rhythm that he convinces himself is merely preparation, the way a mechanic checks parts no one else thinks to check. He reads after curfew with lamps turned low. He practices edges of things and tells himself they are thought experiments. He keeps a ledger in his head of all the times speed saved lives and writes underneath it the name that recurs in his sleep. Line by line, the ledger becomes a permission slip. When you are the person who can lift a rock that would crush a village, you begin to think the test is whether you can lift it, not whether it should be lifted at all. The dreams escalate. They begin to slip into day, just a flicker, just a corner. The way a word almost remembered nags you from the edge of thought. He is planning an approach vector and finds his hand resting on the table where a wrist ought to have been in the vision. He repositions his hand, dislodged by his own tenderness, and swallows because tenderness feels like weakness in rooms where maps are pinned to walls. He tries again. He draws the lines. He lowers the casualty estimates by sheer will. He tells himself that if he can bend outcomes on paper, he can bend them elsewhere. He starts to hide small things, not because they are shameful, but because he cannot bear to have them slowed by process. A question he should ask the council, he saves for later. A technique he should test under supervision, he tests with only a closed door for witness. A look he should share with a friend. Help me. Am I losing the thread? He edits out of his face and replaces with a version of himself he's grown expert at wearing. The one who always knows what to do. This is not hypocrisy. It is fear that need will be mistaken for hunger, that love will be misread as attachment, that his plea for permission will be filed under indulgence and returned stamped too late. He becomes his own counsel and votes aye. The vote passes with a margin of 1 dot. The voice does not press. It merely keeps showing up precisely when he is most tired of being calm. It hands him histories that read like confessions and like recipes. It asks him questions that sound like faith. Do you intend harm? No. Do you seek glory? No. Then what prevents you from learning the ways that could save her? He says the word rules and hears it clink against the floor. Unsatisfying. He says tradition and hears dust. He says patience and hears delay. He says trust and hears a kind of noble fatalism spoken by those who have learned to survive the losses they could not avert. He has not survived those losses yet. He does not intend to try. There is a room he returns to now often. It is not labeled. It does not need to be. The air in it is thicker, as if the walls were built from hours rather than stone. The first time he crossed the threshold, he told himself he was scouting, the way a commander checks a bridge before sending anyone across. The second time, he told himself he was memorizing the way back, because forbidden places are easier to leave when you know the route. The third time, he stopped explaining. He stood in the center, closed his eyes, and breathed until the room seemed to move around him, like a sea. He felt a current under the current he has always known. It was not cruel. It was not kind. It was simply willing. Something in him, a piece shaped by years of making broken things work, leaned toward that willingness and called it hope. He bargains now, not loudly, not like a desperate man beating on a door, but like a professional who has read all the contracts and marked the margins. He offers his discipline, his service, his victories, past and future. He offers his silence too, and does not call it deceit. He calls it timing. He promises he will hold the knowledge carefully, that he will use it for one thing only, that he will put it down after, that he will return to the counted breath of the garden as soon as the danger has passed. The bargain answers him with warmth. It feels uncannily like being believed in. On a night when even the corridor lights seem to flicker with anticipation, he kneels, not to a person exactly, not to a philosophy, but to the idea that love and power need not be enemies if you are strong enough to hold them both. His breath is steady, his hands are steady. He mistakes steadiness for being right. The open door does not swing on creaking hinges. It slides with the discretion of an old friend. He steps through, telling himself a story about speed and mercy and responsibility, about the boy who heard the stars and the man who will not let them fall. Behind him, the latch answers, soft as a sigh. Ahead of him, the hallway looks the same as it always has, until 3 turns later, he realizes the exits have changed. He does not turn back. He walks on, convinced that every cost has already been counted and that the only deception at work is sorrow, trying one last time to keep him small. The ember in his chest flares. Devotion, he calls it, while the tide beneath pulls unseen toward a shore he has not yet learned to name. The world chooses fire as the language for this argument, as if only heat could render the distance between two men who once shared shelter from every storm. Mustafar breathes like a creature injured long ago and still angry. Its rivers are wounds that never scar, its air a forge that will not finish its work. He arrives in a cloak of purpose so tight it might as well be skin. Every step a verdict, every doorway a witness. The foundry grinds its endless metal hymn, sparks blown sideways like impatient stars. And in that orange night, he finds the last person who ever told him no and made the word sound like hope. They do not begin with blades. They begin with memory, with the softest part of betrayal. The catalogue of things each believes the other misunderstood on purpose. The talk is brief because the heat is not. The argument cannot remain words when both men's bodies remember a shared grammar that ends in light dot. The first clash is not the loudest thing around them, and yet it makes the planet listen. It's not frenzy. It's a duet executed at a speed that would be invisible to a room that had not trained its eyes on them for years. Each step is a sentence, each pivot a paragraph, each locked line an old letter returned with the address crossed out. They move through chambers where machines lift and lower metal like tides, cross bridges that complain with every footfall, circle a furnace that drafts their robes as if trying to pull them into a heavier sentence. He presses with the confidence of someone who has decided the story must end this way. The older man yields with the grief of someone who refuses to make ending. The same as victory. Heat has its own logic. It steals water and then judgment. The maskless one glistens with effort. The younger one's eyes shine with something more than sweat. He fights with something like fluency and something like hunger. Every time the blade travels, it imagines a future without resistance. Every time it meets the others, it hears the quiet, patient no that shaped his earliest competence. The air is difficult to drink. He drinks it anyway, gasps and steadies, hears his own breath answer with a rhythm that has not yet become the machine's, but is already practicing its march. The platform lurches. They leap, land, continue. Searing rain spits up from the river as if the planet were trying to write its edit on their bodies. He barely feels it. Conviction is anesthesia when the wound is chosen. There is, inside the fight's blaze, a small, cold room where both of them still live. A training mat that smelled of clean dust. A cantina table where laughter arrived without a warrant. A battlefield where back-to-back meant the world was manageable. He hears the echo of those rooms the way a person hears music through a wall. Faint, insistent, gone, when the door opens. He is not deaf. He is refusing to listen because listening now would be surrender. And he has defined surrender as the only sin left. The older man calls to him, not by rank or role, not even by the boy name that once fit him, but by the person underneath all the titles. But the call is a rope he refuses, for fear it is a leash. They pass through a rain of cinders. They balance on a narrow armature as it rotates over a river that glows like a future he insists on. The argument escalates without changing form. He believes his blade can cut through contradiction. The older man believes his blade can hold a space where the younger might breathe without drowning. Their trust, which once wrote the choreography of victories blindfolded, now writes near misses, and rescues neither wants to admit are rescues. He saves the other from a fall he himself caused. The other saves him from a misstep that anger made inevitable. It would be funny in a cooler world. Here it is simply grief expressed as competence. There comes a moment, fights always compressed down to one, when geometry, not will, chooses. One man rests where height and ground work together. The other is caught by the paradox of momentum. To continue is to lose. To stop is to lose differently. He has never loved dilemmas. He splits them. He calculates an arc that will disprove physics by passion. He springs. For a heartbeat he flies, the old boy in him grinning at impossible angles mastered. Then the math asserts itself, clean and without malice. Light meets limb. The world rotates. The body learns a new map that includes sudden absence. What leaves him is not only balance. It is a strain he has carried since boyhood, the tension of arguing with every rule while trying to be its best student. The pain is white, and then it is wide, and then underneath it, something unclenches. The seventh secret. In the instant of falling, before horror has time to write its sermon, there is relief. No more negotiation, no more splitting yourself to serve two altars. Gravity does not ask for justification. It simply receives. He lands in a place where heat becomes a presence, pressing through skin into thought. The ground is not ground. It is an accusation. The suit he is not yet wearing thunders toward him from a future he can suddenly see because the present has narrowed to a single demand. Breathe. He reaches for the bank, for the old ally who still stands above him, with his blade held like a refusal to be cruel. Words happen, some thrown up like shields, some dragged out like anchors. They are not enough to bridge the new canyon. He sees in the other's eyes a choice, mercy's harder version, and in himself a fury that wants to make mercy responsible for everything that preceded it. He shouts something that believes itself to be power and hears beneath it a child's cry for a promise that cannot be kept. The river reaches up, finds cloth and skin, and writes its signature. The scream that leaves him goes nowhere. The air eats it, the planet drinks it. Only his own skull keeps an echo. The breath that was once counted calmly in a garden burns now as it enters. It feels like inhaling a sentence. He claws for purchase and finds instead a catalogue of what is leaving, the future he had planned in neat, bright lines, the argument he used to have with himself about knots and cords, the dignity of walking away under his own power. The older man turns, not triumphant, not even victorious, but as someone who has just been told a life story he cannot rewrite. He goes because staying would be a worse cruelty. It is a choice that will replay forever in the survivor's nights. However right it was, alone with the planet and the pain. He discovers what heat can cauterize and what it cannot. It closes flesh with fire. It does not close the room in him that just sighed relief. The bargain steps into the open here, no longer hypothetical, no longer whispered under kinder lights. It says, I can make this coherent. I can turn this end into a beginning with metal and code, and a discipline you have always had. All I ask is that you never again reach for the rope that was thrown just now and not taken. He thinks of the rope, of hands that would have pulled, of the impossible humiliation of being helped by the person who just helped him lose the argument he needed to win. And he nods inside where no one sees it. Consent has many shapes. Sometimes it is as small as choosing not to die. If living means becoming what terrified you last year, rescue arrives like a verdict, wrapped as aid. Shapes loom through the heat, shimmer. Voices speak in a key that calls itself concern and also takes notes for tomorrow's leverage. The world goes gray at the edges, then narrows to a tunnel with a table at its end, a mask at its center, a future hissing like a blade without a wielder. He is lifted by hands that do not love him, and yet will keep him alive. He is carried through a doorway he opened when he told himself speed and mercy were the same road. The scent of ash announces the rest of his life. Later, comma. When the machinery breathes for him and the ceiling is an unkind sky, he will remember not only agony but the moment in the fire when a terrible calm sat down beside him, as if to say, "We're done deciding." He will build a fortress on that piece of calm. He will patrol a galaxy from its parapet. He will become the breath's metronome, the tide's monotone, the ember's steady glow. But here, on the riverside where the scream evaporated and left only the echo trapped under bone, he is still simply a person who has fallen as far as a person can and discovered, to his shame and to his rescue, that part of him wanted the argument to end. The volcano has cauterized the sky. The future will suture the rest, and in the seam where pain and relief met, something harder than resolve begins to set, something that feels like certainty, sounds like command, and will take years to admit it was born from a silence where mercy could not reach. Mustafar speaks in furnaces. The planet exhales a low iron groan that turns the air into a kiln. And even the rocks look half melted, like thoughts left too close to a flame. He steps from the shuttle with purpose wrapped tight as a tourniquet. No more questions, no more waiting rooms, only a conclusion pulled sharp from a scabbard. Inside the foundry, the light is all orange truth, too harsh for disguises, and the floor shivers with machines dragging ore through their endless, hungry circuits. Across the glare, he finds the man who taught him how to be patient, how to listen, how not to mistake speed for wisdom. They begin with words because habit insists on one last attempt at peace. It fails the way dry grass fails when you set it beside a spark. What each hears in the other's voice is not argument but betrayal, old sentences returning with different endings. Blades answer next because nothing else can carry the weight they need to move. The first strike does not echo, it devours sound. Light touches light and both harden, and then the rhythm takes them. Parry, slide, angles remembered by muscle long before mind. They fight like two halves of a song that used to know how to harmonize and now keep canceling each other's notes. Platforms tremble under their boots. Gantries swing. Chains clack like metronomes set too fast. Every step is a sentence, every pivot a correction, every locked blade a memory of a class they took together years ago, when neither understood how much was being learned. He presses forward with a fury so precise it feels like clarity. The older man yields, then counters, not to win only, but to keep the space open where the next right choice might still live. He steals judgment one sip at a time. Sweat turns into steam before it can cool them. The foundry's breath dries their throats until words scrape, and when words scrape, you stop trusting them. He leaps first, always. The other angles him aside, always. Once he overcommits, and a plume scorches his sleeve. Once the other misreads a footing and almost falls into the river that moves like a living wound. They save each other without looking, the way a reflex trained by love ignores new orders. It would be comic if it were not so sad. Mercy trying to survive under the same skin as the duel that wants to finish it. Inside the blaze is a small, cold room the volcano cannot reach. In that room he is still the boy proud of praise, still the student hungry for every harder lesson. In that room, the older man is still the teacher who chose gentleness when harshness might have worked faster. They both feel the door to that room under their fingers. Neither opens it because the fight has become a test of identity, and neither believes he can be himself without closing the other's mouth. Let it go, the mentor says, meaning fear, meaning control, meaning the bargain that smells of smoke even in clean air. I have, he answers, meaning the rules that kept him from the door he found, meaning the patience that let the dream grow teeth. They are, in a cruel way, telling the truth. They chase one another across a narrow arm that swings out over molten flow, balance refined to a hair's width by years of practice. He attacks in combinations that would unravel most opponents. The other refuses to be most opponents. Up a staircase of metal ribs, down a bridge that hums like a struck string, out onto an island of slag that tilts when they land. Mustafar changes the map every few breaths, as if to say the ground has its own opinion, and it is not theirs. Flares cough upward, ash drifts in lazy curtains, and the sky, if you can call that glare a sky, shivers with heat mirage, turning edges into lies. He adapts, because adapting is a talent he mistook for a destiny. The older man endures, because enduring is a faith he never learned to talk about. The duel narrows until there's only geometry. One man gains height and angle. The other faces a problem with two bad answers. He chooses the third answer, the one that says talent can cancel math, that commitment can turn air into ground if you believe hard enough. For a heartbeat, he is back in a racer, threading an impossible gap on instinct. Then the numbers collect their due. Light finds flesh. The fall finds heat. Pain writes its name where his body used to be certain. People talk about agony as a shriek. Sometimes it is a release. In the instant before the nerves flood, something unclenches in him that has been clenched since the first day he tried to be two kinds of person in the same skull. The relief is monstrous and honest. No more choosing. Gravity chooses for you. Then the fire arrives and relief becomes a word that cannot survive the alphabet of burning. The ground is a branding iron. The suits he will wear in years to come stand like silhouettes at the edge of his vision, not mercies yet, but promises of motion where motion seems stolen forever. On the bank above, the other's blade holds a line that could be cruelty and declines to cross it. Not triumph, never that. Not even victory. Only the refusal to finish a friend. The lecture that follows comes out broken. The reply that rises to meet it is not a statement, but a howl building a language on its way out. He tries to make the world the villain for not conforming to the shape of his promise. He fails, and rage takes the loss and sells him a simpler story. They did this to you. He bites the story and finds it tastes like salvation. Below, the river throws up sparks that settle on cloth and become scars. The scream tears free, and the planet eats it. The air is too thick to carry it far, the lava too loud to let it travel. Only inside his skull does it echo, and because it cannot get out, it stays. The breath he counted in gardens returns as a rasp, raw from swallowing heat and ash. He tries to move, and the world redraws what moving is. He tries to curse the man above him, and finds that the curse leaks grief all over the edges. The older man turns away because there are two kinds of mercy, and the only one left is leaving. The boots that carry him go slowly, as if disagreement were a weight you lift with each step and set down only at the door. When help arrives, it wears a kindness that has accounts to settle. Shadows bend near the heat shimmer. Voices address him by a name that is not his boyhood and not yet his iron future. He recognizes in their tone the careful blend of concern and ownership used by men who save lives in order to spend them later. He is hauled from the bank with techniques practiced not on friends. The stretcher feels like a verdict. The ceiling of the ship feels lower than any sky has a right to be. On a table under lights that are not warm, he learns what machines can do when the body insists on leaving in pieces. He learns that breath can be forced back into a chest and made to stay by will that is not his own. Soon it will be, and that pain can be renamed until it obeys. The calm that sat beside him on the river's edge returns, now wearing an offer, coherence. All the contradictions, it whispers through the hands that build him, can be soldered shut. We will make you single. He nods somewhere no one can see. The nod is not to evil. It is to an end of confusion. Later he will call that nod by other names. For now it is simply consent born of exhaustion. He remembers dimly a patch of sky from the first time he left the desert, blue so clean it looked like forgiveness. That color recedes behind the smoke. He remembers a hand gripping his shoulder in a training hall, guiding a movement, then leaving room for him to find the rest. That pressure fades. The mask approaches like a moon. He thinks of promises he made to himself about what he would never become, and feels each promise become a hinge instead of a law. Hinges do not break when you open them. They make a sound and let you pass. The volcano hammers the horizon flat, and somewhere above it, in a place the light cannot reach, a friendship breaks without shattering, because pieces remain that will cut whenever touched. The scream that went nowhere tucks itself into the rhythm of a new breath and waits. It will speak again, years later, in a quieter room, when a different choice appears with lightning framing it. But here, in the cauterized sky and the heat that makes metal out of men, he becomes a shape that will not sway. The argument is over. The armor is on its way. The certainty hardens, and the boy who once heard the stars lifts his face to a ceiling that has no constellations, and agrees to be kept alive by a future that will teach him how to live without asking why. White lights glare without warmth, a constellation arranged by hands that do not believe in night. Metal smells like rain that forgot how to fall. He lies in the center of a circle of instruments that make the sounds of busy mercy, taps, hisses, measured beeps, while the planet's roar recedes to a story someone else once told. Heat has already written its verdict into his nerves. Now cooler things approach with promises that sound like instructions: stabilize, replace, seal. Every touch is exact. No touch is gentle. A harness lifts him from stretcher to altar and back again. And he understands, without anyone saying it, that altars are only tables that ask for more than you meant to give. They begin by building a shore for him to wash up on. Ribs that failed the test of fire are braced with a lattice that will never tire. The sternum becomes a door with a lock only machines can read. Where lungs tore, they stitch and glue and graft, then concede to a pump that will never be late to its shift. Tubes sink like roots into places where air once traveled on good faith. Filters promise to strain the world's hostility down to a version the body can survive. The heart insists on beating, stubborn as a drummer who will not abandon a ruined song. They wire it a metronome anyway, a companion that will not let silences grow too long. Pain is taught to hold still. The chemistry is hard, the bargains precise. He floats to the ceiling of himself and looks down at the man on the table as if from a catwalk in a factory where everything is built to specification and nothing remembers sunlight. It is easier up there where the body is design rather than complaint. Easy is not the same as good. He descends when the saws start, because even distance has limits when someone is cutting away the map of who you were. They give him a spine that cannot bargain with fatigue, harsh and honest. They replace the skin that Flame argued with, first with membranes, then with plates that dislike bending. He learns the new vocabulary in pieces: actuator, servo, reinforcement. Each word is a weight. Each weight is a promise. He will not be asked to be soft again, not by gravity, not by enemies, not by his own musculature. The price for that promise is written in the range of motion he trades away like coins counted in someone else's palm. Arms are reimagined as reach and grip, legs as leverage. The old negotiations with balance, ankle, arch, calf, knee, hip, are rewritten as a single doctrine that does not tolerate improvisation. The suit insists on symmetry even when terrain does not. In exchange, it makes him taller than he was, heavier, a creature that floors remember long after he has crossed them. The weight is purposeful. The purpose will often look like inevitability to those who meet it. They return to the chest. The housing is a fortress with windows only on the inside, the sliding panes of breath guided by pistons that will not be argued out of their duty. Ribs are connected to plates that sing when stressed, a tone he will learn and one day stop hearing the way a city stops hearing itself at night. Over the housing comes the cuirass, glossy and absolute, a statement without qualifiers. Straps anchor it to a body that has fewer soft answers to give. The first time they tighten, he feels the shape of his future, held together, held in hands, become instruments. Gloves with nerve assist turn tremor into certainty. Sensors read what skin can no longer provide and translate heat, pressure, texture into a blunt alphabet of signals that his brain will eventually learn to make poetry from. For now, he is all consonants, K and T and R, hard stops and hammers. Feet are armored answers to questions floors never asked. Knees lock with a sound like consent, given in a language he does not yet speak. Last is the head, because last is the place where a man argues with change. The neck ring clamps, and he realizes that turning to look will, from now on, be a decision with ceremony. A cowl settles, the world narrowing to the outline the lenses allow. The mask is brought forward the way honored relics are carried in processions, not hurried, not slow, inevitable. He sees his reflection in its blank. No, not reflection. Refusal. The face is a shield designed to show nothing and therefore to be read as everything by those who fear. It descends. Seal. The word is a soft instruction and a door closing. Cool air floods the passages they have engineered, a path cut through forest for a river that must not silt. He inhales and the system answers with the first iron lullaby, a draw that becomes his, an exhale that makes the room seem further away. The noise is not loud, and yet it fills the space behind his thoughts. It will not leave. He takes another breath, and the metronome he was given in the chest nods approval. He takes a third and understands that this rhythm is a harness and a hymn. Both. Sound arrives filtered now, sanded down by membranes and processors that protect as they estrange. Voices flatten. The room is all edges and instruction. Someone says rise as a test rather than a command, and the table tilts, and the suit makes choices on his behalf that err toward not falling rather than toward grace. He stands. The ankle bone, that negotiator of small truce after small truce, has been demoted. The knee is a hinge that does not forgive. The hip reminds him with every degree that physics is honest in a way flesh never was. Walking is supposedly simple. It becomes a math problem. Weight forward, heel, roll. No rolling now. Plate, plate, plate. Hips steady, shoulders iron. Each step is learned again with the help of small impulses that feel like encouragement and like restraint. Indistinguishable. He finds the balance point the suit prefers and discovers that standing there makes him look like the stories villains tell about themselves. He takes one more step and hears the breath answer, measured, approving, indifferent. The room edges back. "What do you remember?" a voice asks, and the first word his mouth forms behind the filter is not a doctrine or a duty, it is a name. The voice that answers is gentled for him, wrapped in sympathy the way bandages are wrapped tight enough to hold, but not to cut off circulation. The truth falls into his chest like a weight he cannot lift. The new breath keeps coming anyway. The fact that he keeps breathing when he wants to stop becomes a definition he did not choose. The lullaby does not falter. The metronome does not miss. Rage arrives because grief needs somewhere to run, and the corridors of the suit all lead forward. Monitors note the spike and cushion it into tolerances. He slams a fist into a bracketed wall, and the wall survives because it was built to, and his hand survives because it was rebuilt to. And the only thing that breaks is air, which gathers itself and reforms without complaint. He understands, dimly and then clearly, that he is now housed in a tool designed to make consequence someone else's problem. He vows to aim it. He vows never to rest. Vows spoken into a mask sound like verdicts. When they lower the helmet's final ring, and the world becomes a tunnel with edges he can adjust but never remove, he expects the claustrophobia of a coffin. What he feels instead is the austerity of a cell he has chosen because the monastery at the edge of him burned down. He can live here. He will live here so long that here will replace any other word. The first steps away from the table are a procession no one attends but his own ghosts. He moves past instruments that forget him as soon as the next patient arrives. He moves past the window that shows stars arranged into a geometry that has not changed for his sorrow. He moves toward a ship, a hallway, a duty offered like a lifeline that is also a leash he accepts because leashes keep you from walking into certain pits. Pain remains, mapped, managed, never gone. The suit feeds him news of his own edges, pressure points blooming, heat zones intensifying, micro-tears reported and addressed. It is a chorus of concerned clerks whose concern ends at the boundary of flesh. Inside the boundary, meaning is a job he must perform alone. The breath helps. It counts for him when his mind refuses. It counts down what cannot be changed and counts up what soon will be. In counting, he finds a strange, clean clarity that looks like peace to those who have not lost anything recently. He takes possession of the voice the mask gives him and discovers its weight is a tool too, a gravity that pulls answers down from those who would have lied to a gentler frequency. He says a few things and watches them land. People nod, not in agreement, but in alignment. He feels the suit's satisfaction register in haptics, an animal pleased to have found its stride. He does not correct it. He is too busy noticing how every corridor now seems the right width, how every door opens at the right moment, how the world has learned a new etiquette around him. Later, they will tell stories about the first time they heard the breathing in an empty hall and understood they were not alone. He hears it first in a mirror, the inhale and exhale folding the man beneath into a tempo the galaxy will memorize. He tells himself it is armor, and it is. He tells himself it is penance, and sometimes it will be. He tells himself it is necessary, and that will be true often enough to make the rest of it bearable. The lullaby becomes law, the law becomes habit, the habit becomes home. He pauses at the threshold of his new life and listens. The room behind him ticks with cooling metal. The road ahead hums with ships ready to obey. Between them, a breath. He takes it. It takes him. And in that shared taking, the mask finishes being born, not just as a thing he wears, but as a room he will furnish with purpose, until purpose and prison become, to everyone else, the same word. Hallways learn his rhythm before names do. The first patrols are not battles so much as demonstrations, the suit establishing its grammar so the galaxy can read it without needing subtitles. Doors part earlier than they used to. Comms go quiet a half-second too soon. In the wake of a corridor's lights blooming on, people discover that fear is not simply a feeling, it is logistics, a schedule rearranged, a shipment rerouted, a secret moved twice in one night until the secret forgets what it was supposed to be. He walks and the ship remembers to hold its breath. He stops and the ship exhales, shaken, grateful, a little angrier at itself for being so moved by a sound. Orders come as coordinates and as rumors. A cell on Corellia, too chatty, suddenly cautious. A monk on Jedi speaks of balance to ears that have begun to like fire. A warehouse on Quat, quiet too long for a place that profits most when machinery never rests. He goes where the map says, and also where the whisper points. The breath enters first, a scout that needs no stealth. What follows is swift, measured, absolute, no flourish, no cruelty for spectacle. Simply a decision applied until it stops resisting. Men accustomed to shouting their defiance discover that shouting wastes air they need for other things, like begging. He does not ask for pleas. He asks for names, routes, caches, and whether the person in front of him plans to be wise before bones are persuaded to be honest. Control is mercy, he told himself once, and now he demonstrates it as policy rather than sentiment. The squads assigned to him learn quickly that hesitation is a contagion and that certainty can be borrowed from a figure who never appears uncertain. They also learn, to their surprise, that his punishments are rarer than whispers promised because his standards are not about freckle-sized infractions. They are about purpose, late to muster, a look, sloppy with a blaster, correction, and drills, lying, and education in consequences that the whole hangar hears because hierarchies run on stories, and a single, well-told cautionary tale can replace a dozen memos. If fear is to be a rule, it must feel fair in the way weather feels fair, not personal, yet impossible to ignore. He is not alone in the work of making fear a tool. The Inquisitorius arrives like a specialist wing attached to his enterprise, a collection of survivors who were never meant to survive, blades that once swore one kind of oath now honed to another. They are eager, dangerous, theatrical. Some carry hurt like a banner, some like a stone in the mouth they grind their teeth on at night, some like a ladder they intend to climb forever. He treats them as both instruments and hazards. With one gloved hand, he directs. With the other, he braces for the day one of them decides proximity to power is indistinguishable from permission to try for more. Their hunts are lessons in calibration. A rumor of a hidden master draws them to a village where the wells run sweet and the children run braver than their parents. And the fifth brother wants to raise it flat, to see what rises from the ashes. No, he says, and the word is a gate that does not need a lock. They set a net instead. Shortages introduced like riddles, routes narrowed. A single false ledger allowed to be found by eyes trained to trust the wrong details. When the fugitive finally emerges, it is not to save a stranger, but to rebuke the arithmetic of cruelty. He steps into the circle the trap has drawn and chooses containment over spectacle, extinguishing the blade that flares with a gesture that looks like dismissal and is, more precisely, the refusal to let the old faith have the last luminous word. The village learns that living quietly is safer than living loudly. The Inquisitors learn that theater wastes fuel. At times he lets theater happen anyway, not because he enjoys it, but because symbols serve as shortcuts. A hangar bay with scorch marks tells a better story than a sanitized report. A corridor filmed in one long shot with no cuts. Troopers advancing behind a black figure while sparks pinch the air travels further than a memo about compliance. He learns which governors will do as they're told and which ones need a demonstration, and he apportions demonstrations like medicine: the right dose, the right frequency, attention paid to side effects. He is not a sadist. He is a physician convinced that scaring the patient now will keep the disease from spreading later. He builds a core of listeners and a web of absence. Listeners bring him the murmur before it becomes a shout. Absence is the art of removing just enough of a dissident's infrastructure that the leader spends every day stitching instead of striking. A hangar vanishes from a manifest. A sympathetic dockyard finds its contracts rerouted. A mid-level financier discovers that no one will return his calls. The Inquisitors prefer a duel to a ledger. He indulges their appetites where duels will teach a useful lesson, especially to young blades who think fury is a path rather than a tool. He puts them on leashes long enough to let them define their shape, short enough that none of them learn the wrong idea about who holds the other end. Sometimes calmer though, the work is close and simple. A door slides. A hallway reveals 6 men who have chosen the uglier end of courage. He moves through them the way a thought moves through a sentence, when the speaker has already decided what the final clause will be. A choke here, a throw there, a blade when geometry recommends it. He leaves one breathing so information will continue. He leaves one breathing because even now, when he calls himself Iron, a small, unadvertised mercy flickers at the edge of his choices. Perhaps it is habit. Perhaps it is penance in the only currency the day accepts. He is careful to avoid becoming bored. Boredom breeds flourish, and flourish breeds waste. When an operation threatens to become routine, he changes the variables, shifts the angle of approach, rearranges who leads the breach, interrogates the problem from a different flank. He tests his lieutenants by letting them stand one step closer to him than they did last week. He watches who gets taller with pride and who merely steadies. The ones who steady, he promotes. Pride looks good on parade grounds and poor in disaster. There are failures. A target slips a perimeter he was sure would hold. An informant feeds him a name that turns out to be a decoy, costing hours, costing blood. He inventories the errors without drama, assigns consequence where it will teach rather than humiliate, and replaces the bad line in the plan with a better one. He reserves humiliation for enemies, rarely for his own, because fear that looks inward too often turns men into statues, and statues do not move fast enough to keep up with maps that redraw themselves every hour. Between hunts, he returns to the fortress that rises over the same river that remade him. Mustafar receives him with a heat that has become a language he can read without translating. The castle is both monastery and machine, meditation held down by basalt, and anger vented by architecture. He experiments there with doors that might open to the past, not to live in it, but to make it answer a question that will not stop asking itself. The attempts fail, or mislead, or tempt. He uses the failures as additional locks on the room that would otherwise flood. He uses the temptations to train himself in not touching what he wants to touch. The discipline is real. It is also a practice that sharpens the exact edge he will later use to cut through the final knot. Inquisitors arrive for debriefs and leave corrected in ways they resent and admire. One, too reckless by half, asks him in a moment of unwise candor whether he fears anything. The mask turns. The lenses give back only the asker's own outline. Chaos, he says, which is true, and complacency, which is truer. And then, after a small pause that makes the room colder, disobedience, which lands not as a threat, but as a theological statement. After that, the question does not recur. He refines the rule of fear until it resembles predictability for those who obey it. Civilians learn that certain lines, once notional, now have teeth. Commanders learn that results will be rewarded and excuses will be treated as attempts at fiction. The Inquisitors learn that screaming is not strategy, and that a whisper at the right ear can turn a planet's mood more effectively than a massacre. The rule is simple to state and complicated to apply. Fear should point toward order, not toward the nearest throat. When it points toward him, it should be awe, not panic. Panic scatters. Awe gathers. On a low red morning, he stands at the hangar mouth of his fortress and looks down at the black shore where lava meets stone and hardens just long enough for waves of fire to break it again. Patrols launch, reports arrive. Somewhere, a small rebellion decides to sleep with its boots on. He breathes and the fortress answers, ducts throbbing in the same tempo as the lungs it protects. He thinks of the boy who once believed that fixing a thing meant it would stay fixed. He thinks of the man who now knows that some worlds must be held together by pressure until their fractures forget how to speak. When he turns away, the cape moves like a curtain closing on an intermission. The next act will begin with a name he has not spoken in years, appearing on a scanner the way a memory surfaces in a dream. Sudden, precise, undeniable. For now, the patrols fly their arcs, the Inquisitors polish their questions, and the rule of fear hums through the lanes of commerce and the quiet streets at dusk. It is not peace. It is the kind of silence that allows certain necessary work to continue, and as long as the breath keeps time, the work will. The castle rises from the cooled lip of a wound, as if the planet tried to grow a scab, and he insisted it take the shape of a home. Mustafar breathes around it, a furnace exhaling through stone lungs, and the fortress answers with a low mechanical hymn, ducts and vents harmonizing with lava's restless hymn below. He chose this place not because it is beautiful, though in certain red hours it is, but because it is honest. Heat does not pretend to be anything but what it is. The river does not apologize for rewriting the shore. In such company, he can set down his armor's silence and listen to a different kind of truth. The steady conversation between pain and structure, the way a wound speaks when you give it architecture. The builders learned quickly that the mountain argues. Foundations poured like declarations returned as questions at dawn, edges softened by rising vapor, corridors sweating mineral tears. He ordered the basalt cut with angles that deflect rather than receive, sight lines that refuse ambush, thresholds that compress the body into humility before widening into halls where breath must slow. Every stone placement is a sentence in a language that says, "You will not surprise me here. You will not own me here. You will enter changed." The fortress is a machine for perspective. It shrinks the visitor into a manageable size and enlarges the occupant until he feels as inevitable as gravity. It is also, in its way, a monastery. The rooms do not permit noise for its own sake. Even the meditation chamber, an oval of polished black that drinks light until torches surrender, demands that each thought enter barefoot. He does not fill the keep with trophies. There are tokens, yes, but they are not displayed like heads on pikes. They live in drawers, in small reliquaries behind panels, fragments of crystal that once sang in different keys, a scorched belt clasp retrieved from a hanger floor, a scrap of robe whose ash he brushed from a gauntlet without meaning to keep it and found he could not throw away. Objects are gateways if you stare at them long enough. He has learned to look and then to stop, the way a man learns to stand at the edge of a cliff and enjoy the view without stepping forward. Below the keep is a deeper lattice the living seldom see, channels like veins, vents like throats, chambers aligned to fault lines the way cathedrals align to cardinal points. He did not design all of it. Some was there long before him, a rumor of temple, a skeleton of rooms built by hands that worshipped what the planet became when left too long with its anger. He mapped what he could, sealed what misbehaved, opened what promised either answer or warning. In those depths, the air is thick and old. It holds the taste of experiments gone right and wrong, of attempts to ask the past a question in the only tense it still understands. There were nights he stood before a door of obsidian veined with heat and felt the door breathe back. Steady as a sleeper, he touched it with a palm that no longer knows warmth except as pressure, and the door told him, in a language of aching, that some thresholds do not open outward or inward, they open downward, and what goes down does not always climb. So he made his questions smaller. Instead of demanding the past on his knees, he invited it to sit across from him as a guest. He would light a single lamp in the high chamber, whose windows overlooked the black shore, and place on the table some ordinary thing, a cup, a broken emitter, a slice of red fruit he will not taste, and let his mind pace the room of memory in measured steps. In such evenings, the wound in him speaks like a tide that has learned grammar. It asks, almost politely, "What did you think speed was for?" He answers with the only truth that still feels clean, for saving what could be saved. The wound replies, "And when that became saving the feeling of saving, did you notice?" He does not like the question. He keeps it anyway, as one keeps a bitter herb for a tea you need when a winter cough arrives. On some mornings the inquisitors arrive like weather, hats and edges, impatience and scars, bringing reports that smell of carbon and triumph. They file through the audience hall where the floor reflects their gait back at them, and the ceiling lowers conversations into confessions. He listens from the dais that is not a throne, but teaches the same lesson. Elevation changes the shape of truth. They speak of sightings, of whispers, of a child who lifted a crate with a hand she pretended only to wave. He assigns resources with a precision that looks like indifference and is, in fact, stewardship of a kind they rarely recognize. When they leave, the hall exhales. He waits until the echo fades, then descends, alone, to the room where the castle admits it is a body and reveals its beating heat. The river is visible from a narrow balcony that juts like a jaw over the bright wound. He stands there on nights when the wind refuses to be born and the smoke lies like a lid on the valley. The glow paints his armor in gradients of red not even polish can quite deny. He does not imagine penance in these viewings. That would be too tidy, and he has trained himself away from tidy moralities. He is here because the planet tells a story he respects. Pressure finding release, pressure finding form, form failing and trying again. The lava hardens into black tongues that look like roads, then breaks and flows, and each cycle is a reminder that permanence is often just a longer pause between collapses. The fortress stands because it cooperates with collapse, channels it, redirects it, turns fury into stairwells and corridors and chambers where a man can be alone with his definitions. There are gateways within the keep that are not doors. One is the long, polished strip of floor between the meditation oval and the armory, a catwalk of reflection down which he walks slowly to watch the figure he has become keep pace beneath him. Another is the window glass that holds back a climate not meant for lungs, while allowing his eyes to trespass on distances he can not otherwise survive. Another is the simple act of removing the helmet in a sealed chamber and letting the world touch his skin in a way that is not a bruise. The first time he did it here, after the suit's birth, the air felt like a question he had not prepared for. Now it feels like a parenthesis. He speaks to no one in that punctuation. He breathes and lets the metronome inside him argue with the tide outside until the arguments cancel. The castle's acoustics teach obedience to silence. Even the servo motors of his stride modulate down a fraction when he enters the high library, as if circuitry can remember awe. The holocrons stacked in precise geometries purr when woke, present when asked, coy when they desire respect. He has found, to his surprise, that many refuse spectacle as much as he does. They open not to force, but to curiosity, so disciplined it looks like stillness. He is patient with them in a way he is not patient with people. Perhaps because crystal never lies about what it can offer, conversations with a wound are not linear. Some nights it wants a ledger. Tally the saved, tally the lost, tally the ambiguous cases you call necessary so the numbers do not drown you. Some nights it wants a lullaby. Remind me of the desert stars, of the way engines hum when they are pleased with you, of a hand that smoothed your hair when the world was louder than a child deserved. He provides both. In return, the wound grants him something like calibration. He rises from those sessions less likely to waste fear on corners that contain only shadow, more likely to see the one corridor where darkness pools with intent. The castle is also a trap he laid for himself. He knows this and does not dismantle it. A man who built his life around forward motion needs a place where every stair insists on measured ascent, where every landing invites the smallest pause. The fortress enforces a temper he once thought he could only simulate. It is not kindness, it is design. But the effect resembles kindness often enough that on the rare dusk, when the sky thins to a sullen rose and the vents cough a cooler breath, he stands in the threshold between armory and sky and feels, if not peace, then its shadow moving across his thoughts. Gateways in the deeper vaults tempt. Once, after a hunt that ended with a child's eyes understanding too much too soon, he unlocked 3 seals that should not be combined and asked the quiet room beyond them to return a voice he had chased for years. The air thickened, the lights bent. A line of cold drew itself across his throat like a teacher's ruler. He stopped. The door undrew. The castle resumed its old grammar, as if to say, "I will keep your secrets if you will keep mine." He agreed aloud, which he rarely does with buildings. The word echoed in the shaft like a coin dropping into a well whose bottom no one has measured. On the highest parapet there is a stone bench no one else uses. It faces not the river, but the long ash plain where nothing grows and everything remains. He sits there when reports arrive that carry a name he has tried not to say for years. The plateau listens. The mask listens. He listens to the space between breath and edict and waits for the wound to speak. When it does, its voice is quieter now than it used to be, not because it has healed, but because it has learned that shouting makes men stubborn and whispering makes them honest. "If he comes," the wound says, and the castle says nothing because castles do not speculate. "You will not be ready or unready. You will be yourself. Make sure that is someone who can survive the answer." Below, the river throws fire at the night until the night stops pretending not to care. Above, the keep keeps. Within, the corridors hold a measured dark a man can learn by heart. He rises not because the vision is finished, but because patrols need their arcs and hallways need their rhythm, and the rule of fear spreads best when its author knows when to leave a room. As he moves, the fortress folds behind him like a book closing on a chapter that will be opened again tomorrow. And the wound inside him, conversational and unclosing, walks at his shoulder like a companion who does not need to be seen to be obeyed. The desert greets him like an old argument, dry and steady, full of space where a man can hear his own breath whether he wants to or not. He arrives not for sand, not for sun, but for a thread that keeps returning to his hand no matter how many knots he ties to lose it. Scouts report a small transport, the kind that lands more gently than it leaves. Tracks cross and blur, then vanish where wind keeps its own counsel. He does not hurry. He has learned that certain meetings do not belong to speed. They belong to gravity. The first hint is not sight, but presence, a familiar contour in the field, like finding an old fracture in bone with the tip of a tongue. The second hint is stillness, and the wound inside him, conversational and unclosing, walks at his shoulder like a companion who does not need to be seen to be obeyed. The desert greets him like an old argument, dry and steady, full of space where a man can hear his own breath whether he wants to or not. He arrives not for sand, not for sun, but for a thread that keeps returning to his hand no matter how many knots he ties to lose it. Scouts report a small transport, the kind that lands more gently than it leaves. Tracks cross and blur, then vanish where wind keeps its own counsel. He does not hurry. He has learned that certain meetings do not belong to speed. They belong to gravity. The first hint is not sight, but presence, a familiar contour in the field, like finding an old fracture in bone with the tip of a tongue. The second hint is stillness that is not surrender, a stillness he remembers from halls where lamps floated like domesticated stars. He steps forward and the planet's heat wraps him, and for a long, quiet line of seconds there is only the interval between two that is not surrender, a stillness he remembers from halls where lamps floated like domesticated stars. He steps forward and the planet's heat wraps him, and for a long, quiet line of seconds there is only the interval between two lives that used to be one dot. They do not begin with blades. They begin with the smallest acknowledgments men can afford when history has made courtesies into luxuries. A shift of stance that admits the years, a tilt of the head that counts the cost. Every step a notation in a score he has played too often to be surprised by. Yet surprise arrives anyway, not in technique, but in tone. The older man does not fight to win, he fights to understand, and being understood in the middle of violence feels, to him, intolerable. They travel the landscape the way a sentence travels clauses, crest to dip to pause, each punctuation a strike, each conjunction a parry. He finds moments to overrun, to crush, the way a tide erases footprints. The other refuses to be footprints, becomes stone, instead, absorbs, redirects. It is an argument in a language only they speak. Remember, forget, release, hold. When the blades lock, the sound is the memory of a bell rung in a temple that no longer houses worshippers. He wants to silence the bell. He wants silence so complete it passes for certainty. He drives forward. The ground decides to interfere. A ridge crumbles under a hard pivot, and they spill into a scar in the earth where old water once worked and left behind patience as sediment. Dust rises in a sheet. They vanish into it and come out changed by angle and loss of breath. He throws the world at his foe, stone, pressure, the invisible shove that makes air into a wall, and for a handful of heartbeats, he feels the old thrill of dominance. The one that says, wait, is truth. But the older man's center holds in a way it never did before, as if distance taught him something about being a fulcrum. The push returns not as force, but as absence. And he steps into a gap that isn't there and meets a strike that is. Metal screams, not his. Not yet. The line breaks, reforms. He recalls Mustafar in a flash of heat that has nothing to do with the sun. The memory sharpens him. He surges, and the land gives him a brief theater. Shattered stones becoming steps under his boots, a jut of rock offering vantage. The other follows not with speed, but with timing, that older, quieter skill. Their silhouettes cross against a sky too bright to judge them. The next exchange is clean enough to be studied later by men who think swordsmanship is an art separate from grief. Then the blade slips in where plans are thin, and something yields. Not flesh, face. The seam of the helmet, a line he trusts like a boundary on a map, opens under the other's strike. The plate splits with a note as intimate as a crack in glass you have polished daily with your own hands. Heat pours in where filtered air once made a tunnel. Air pours out with the hiss of a breath no longer private. For a heartbeat the world funnels to that opening, a wedge of skin lit by a cruel noon, an eye that remembers too many rooms, a mouth whose shape he knows from laughter that has not existed for years. The sound that leaves him is not the voice the galaxy fears. It is thinner, rougher, and therefore more dangerous to the man wearing it. The other speaks, no grand pronouncement, only the kind of sentence you say when what you see in front of you is both a friend and a wound. In that split, their two names try to occupy the same space. He reaches for the one he has chosen because choice is the only thing holding the architecture together. The older man calls him by the one he lost, as if saying it might resurrect it. Between them hangs the oldest question, are you still there? Truth arrives with an ugliness that feels like relief. He tells it not to heal but to sever, not to reconcile but to make clean edges where ragged ones have mocked him for years. He says in the grammar of finality that the boy is gone, and that what stands here is the only honest outcome of an argument that should have ended long ago. The other hears the cruelty and, being who he is now, hears also the confession tucked inside it like a shard. I cannot be both. Please stop asking me to be. The desert hears only breath dragged through torn filters and a name cut in half by a mask. A wind stirs, petty and insistent, and dust finds the open seam, stings the eye that hasn't looked at this man without glass in years. He steps forward with the reflex of ending. If you end the witness, you end the mirror. But his strike falters exactly where the crack reveals the human timing underneath the machine's rhythm. The other looks at him the way one looks at a star used to navigate by when clouds have made stars rare, not for permission, not for absolution, simply to mark position before turning away. Mercy lands like a blow. He feels it in his ribs, in the plates bolted to those ribs, in the metronome that cannot speed or slow to match humiliation. He roars, the old voice, the one with iron in it, and the canyon throws it back smaller than it left. The older man does not answer with triumph. He answers by leaving. There is a way to win that feels like loss, and a way to lose that feels like escape. They each take one and walk away with the other tucked inside it. He stands in the sunlight with the broken edge of his mask scraping his cheek and discovers that rage can do nothing with a back that refuses to be enemy. The eye exposed to the day waters, a traitorous human function he cannot command. He covers it with a gauntlet and feels the suit rise to stabilize, to soothe, to return him to the narrower whether he survives best. Later, when the technicians seal the crack and restore the voice to its terrible monotone. The spoken truth remains, nesting where the scream once nested on a different shore. He has told the world what he needed to believe to continue, that the boy is dead, that the man is complete, that names are engines, and you do not switch them off in flight. The voice modulator will make the telling sound unquestionable next time, but he will know, in the private rooms where breath counts without anyone listening, that for 1 minute under a bright sky, he spoke without the mask and said two things at once. I am only this now, and I remember what I was. The desert, which keeps everything if you do not bury it deep enough, will keep that moment. So will the man who walked away, carrying in his leaving the last and worst kindness a teacher can give, proof that he sees you clearly and will not pull you from the shape you chose. Patrols will resume. Orders will arrive. The rule of fear will hum through its circuits, and somewhere in the acoustics of a fortress built over an old wound, a small line of air will remember the path it took through a broken plate to reach an eye, and the eye will remember the warmth of unfiltered light, and the man will sit very still and allow the memory to exist without letting it grow. That is the new discipline. Harder than any stance, duller than any blade. To acknowledge the split without living inside it, to seal the mask and still hear what the crack once said. Cloud City pretends at gentleness. Pastel corridors, soft carpets, the civic smile of a place that wants to be remembered for comfort rather than for sale. But it was always built to capture air, to measure it, to tax it, and so it learns his rhythm as quickly as any destroyer. Doors that open just a fraction too soon, lights that find corners before his cape does, vents that hush when he stops so he can hear the map he has already drawn. The trap is not spiteful, it is professional. He lets it be elegant because elegance spares waste. The bait is an old friend's need, disguised as safety, expressed in hospitality. and he does not have to crush it to make it serve. He arranges the pieces with the calm of a man repairing a clock. One gear here, one spring there, a pressure valve assigned to a specific corridor, and waits for the boy whose presence he can feel now, the way a weathered deckhand knows a storm's direction by taste alone. When the first report arrives, small fighter, wrong vector, impossible timing, he feels the corridor air shift in recognition, as if the city itself has remembered a name dot. He does not hurry to the meeting. He prepares for it the way one prepares for a delicate surgery, room cleared, edges softened, instruments tested, armor checked, lungs counting, patience rehearsed. He rehearses most of all the part where he will speak without anger, because truth delivered as accusation curdles into rebellion. But truth delivered like a hand extended can become a bridge. The boy arrives thinner than legend and heavier than rumor, carrying with him a heat that is not the planet's and a stubbornness that makes even polished floors feel like uneven ground. He comes armed with an idea of evil that has your height and your voice, and he swings at the idea with the faith of someone who has not yet learned how many shapes evil wears. The first exchange is not a duel. It is a measurement. Reach, reflex, the way the force gathers around him like wind around an upthrust cliff. He surprises you. That is good. Surprise is a hinge you can swing a door on. They fight in the white-walled civility of the city's public face, and then in the metal ribs behind it, where maintenance crews make things possible without being seen. He uses space as an instrument, narrowing it, widening it, refusing it, so that every step the boy takes is an answer to a question he is only just learning how to hear. Every answer is brave. Not every answer is wise. The boy throws heat at problems that have no temperature, and you deflect it, not to belittle but to shape. He expects cruelty. You give him competence. He expects a monster. You give him silence. He expects a war. You become gravity. The difference is subtle, and it confuses him, and confusion is part of the lesson, because behind the lesson waits the invitation, and the invitation must fall on a mind that has discovered its present tools are not enough. The city groans under the weight of the conversation. He is nimble, improvising with the reckless joy of the talented. You are patient, returning him to the same position by different routes, so that he discovers the limits himself and cannot blame the ceiling. A blast door closes and divides brightness from dark. There, in the dim, the boy learns what it feels like when the force stops being a rumor and becomes a climate. You guide debris with 2 fingers and let it answer for you. Here is what a room does when it belongs to someone else. Here is what a body does when it meets a will that can afford to wait. He staggers, recovers, throws himself forward again. Somewhere inside your ribs, the metronome keeps time for 2 hearts now, uninvited and inexorable. When he bleeds, the color is a message you do not let yourself read. When he howls, the sound is a memory you refuse to assign a decade. He is no longer discovering the boundaries. He is discovering the cost of ignoring them. You decide the lesson has gone far enough. You break his guard the way a sculptor breaks excess from a statue, quick and exact. The hand falls away in an arc that the city will replay at low volume for years, because cities collect folklore whether they want to or not. Pain teaches what humility would have taught more gently. In the shock's wake, you do the most dangerous thing you have done since a river wrote its name into your skin. You tell the truth. You do not build to it. You do not soften it with abstractions. You explain the past with a blade of simple language and then put the blade down. Names are engines, and you start two at once. The one he has heard, and the one he must now hear from the only mouth that can make it real. The force tenses around the statement like muscle under cold water. The boy's face catalogues every version of refusal, denial, disgust, the frantic rummaging for alternative explanations that do not require him to redraw his childhood. The shock is not that evil has a father's voice. The shock is that his own voice answers back to it and recognizes itself. He's a good child in the most complicated sense of the word. His loyalty is not naive, it is chosen. And still, in the space after your sentence, loyalty has to build a new scaffolding from splinters. You do not reach for him then. You reach for him after. The timing matters. You offer the hand not as capture but as partnership, not as dominance but as relief. Come with me is a simple architecture. Out of these corridors, off this city, away from the smaller wars to the larger work. You do not sell him a throne. You sell him a repair. Two can carry what one cannot. Two can go where institutions will always refuse to tread. You name the emperor without naming him, a shadow that has learned how to pretend to be light. You name the lie you swallowed once and learned to digest. You invite him to refuse the diet you were fed. It is not a test. It is a plea disguised as a strategy. The oldest contradiction you have ever tried to live inside. He looks at your hand and sees not a bridge, but a dock he was not taught to approach. He sees the people who have held him up. Tell him not to take it. He sees a friend frozen in a room he could not prevent, a mentor who bled for him, a sister who does not yet know she is one, a future that will punish him for being chosen by the wrong person. He sees, too, the trap inside the offer, because he is not foolish. The invitation makes a ladder out of his love and leads to a place where he cannot be only himself anymore. He shakes his head. He does not do it gently. This is the first time your hand has been refused without calculation or fear. It stings in the exact place the old wound likes to sit. Then the storm takes him. The city is a gorge of wind now, coolant and pressure screaming through veins designed to carry other, calmer fluids. He steps backward into air because backwards is away from you, and away is the only true choice he can see that doesn't sound like betrayal. The fall is clean. It is, in a cruel way, courageous. He chooses uncertainty over an answer that would solve too much too fast. The shaft swallows him, and he becomes the smallest moving thing in a machine full of purposes. For a breath you consider following. You do not. The lesson on the balcony years from now will require him to arrive under his own power. You watch him drop into the city's lungs, and for a moment the metronome inside you misses. After comma, the corridors remember only echoes. The governor hears the low, precise cadence of your retreat and decides to keep his head down for a season. The bounty hunter negotiates without gloating, because he has the sense to treat proximity to your temper as a weather event best waited out. You return to your ship with a new gravity, not heavier exactly, but more specific. You have spoken the truth and discovered that truth does not behave like a lever unless the other end is willing to be lifted. You have offered partnership and discovered that love is not persuaded by imprecision. You have lost a hand's worth of certainty and gained a fault line you will stand on again. Alone in your chamber. You extend the palm you had held out. The gauntlet remembers recent air. You close the fingers and open them. close and open until the gesture becomes pure mechanics with no ache attached. The breath steadies. Outside, the fleet counts down to hyperspace. Somewhere in the dark, a boy clutches an antenna and refuses to let your words become his law. You do not rage. Rage would be too loud, would make you lie to yourself about control. Instead, you inventory the improvisation he showed, the devotion that shook him but did not break him, the way he looked at your hand as if it were a future with too many rooms. The inventory becomes a plan, because plans are how you manage the parts of pain that can be made useful. He will come, not because you demand it, but because everything that is true pulls like gravity, and some orbits take longer to settle. Between now and then are more traps and more truths and more storms. Between now and then, your breath will continue to count in a room that foreigners mistake for silence, and that you know as the place where offers are forged. You look again at the hand, flex once, and turn toward the next door. The city exhales. The trap resets. The outstretched hand remains, not extended now, but remembered, a line you will draw again when the boy is a man, and the storm arranges itself into the throne room, where lightning teaches a lesson neither of you could learn in softer weather. The throne room is made of decisions pretending to be furniture. A chair too high to be comfortable, windows that frame a wall like a painting, a floor polished enough to make every step self-conscious. Space itself seems staged here, angles arranged so that power has the best acoustics. He enters knowing the room has been built not only to contain a meeting, but to decide it. A geometry that makes surrender look like wisdom and obedience look like gravity. The breath measures the distance between the three of them, master in shadow, sun in light that never warms, father in the corridor between. Each inhale and exhale a plank in a narrow bridge no one else can see. The Emperor's voice arrives like velvet draped over wire, admiring and amused. It crooks a finger at hope and calls it naive. The boy's answer is a refusal that still remembers kindness. He watches that refusal with a heat he will not name, because to name it would be to admit a vow he has not yet made. The duel begins as choreography, not murder. Bright blade against bright blade, the Emperor's hands steepled like a man waiting for a coin toss to land on the side he has waited. The boy fights with a clarity that shakes him, angles honest, strikes that mean what they say, the will to win checked by the will not to become. He would once have called such restraint weakness. Now it looks like a narrow path across a ravine, each careful step the opposite of cowardice. He answers as he has answered for years, with pressure, with timing, with the weight of inevitability. He drives the boy backward across the black gloss and hears under the hiss and clash the faintest echo of another room where someone told him letting go was not the same as losing. The mask does not permit sighs. The lungs do the ritual instead. The Emperor narrates in the way men narrate when they believe the play is theirs. Good, good, hate, hate, feel, strike. The words aim for the boy, but they land also in him, waking the old appetites dressed as counsel, the bright-hot certainty that ends tiring questions. He parries and presses, and there is a moment. There is always a moment when the boy falters at the edge of a taunt about a sister he has not met properly, and the falter becomes fury, and fury becomes force, and the force becomes a storm in the boy's arms that drives him back in a skirl of sparks until his guard splits and the blade bites metal where metal guards a wrist. The hand that falls is not his this time, and the sound it makes on the steps is a bell rung for another kind of service. He looks down at the boy's severed fingers and sees geometry instead of blood, the tidy conclusion a certain logic always offers. The Emperor applauds without clapping. The room tilts very slightly toward murder. He feels the tilt like a tide in bone, the invitation to finish what anger started, to convert conflict into cleanliness. The boy looks up, breathing hard, eyes carrying equal shares of pain and recognition. He waits for the decision he has feared since a different gantry over a different fire, the decision that would prove the prophecy's unkind version true. The Emperor leans not forward but inward, the way a shadow leans when you move your candle, and from that lean comes the decree that has ended so many stories. Now. It is a terrible word, because it sounds like courage, even when it is merely hunger with its hair-combed . He turns and looks at the Emperor with the stillness of a man measuring the depth of a well he may have to enter. The boy's blade waits near his throat without moving. He could strike forward and end this small rebel. He could pivot and kneel and end his uncertainty. He could throw the weapon away and end the pretense that he is free. What he does is listen, to breathe, to a thin seam of memory that opens like a crack in his mask once did, to a distant lullaby from a desert where stars learned his name. He hears the boy whisper a sentence that is not a tactic, but a decision. I'll never turn. Not I can't. Not I don't know how. Never. The word has weight because it renounces shortcuts. The Emperor hears the word and brands it treason. He hears it in somewhere deep. A coal writes down a yes he has not spoken. Lightning smells like a storm that refuses rain. The Emperor lifts his hands, and a lesson begins that has ended too many lives. It is not subtle. It is not meant to be. It is the demonstration you reserve for students who will not agree to your syllabus. The boy convulses on the edge of a fall he will not take. Light climbs his bones from the outside, hunting marrow. He cries out, and the cry finds the old echo that has lived inside the suit since a different scream went nowhere. The mask makes no expression. The body remembers anyway. He stands within arm's reach of the Empire's true instrument and watches the boy burn, and the Emperor's voice keeps teaching. See what defiance costs. See how mercy is a flaw. See how love is a hinge, and I know how to break hinges. Breath becomes metronome, becomes jury, becomes the only sound that belongs to him. In, out. Count and do not think is what the training said. He counts, and thinking barges in anyway. He inventories all the reasons to stay still. The vows, the debts, the years of doctrine that taught him there is only one forward. But each reason feels like a stone on a scale whose other pan holds the word son. He has said that word only to himself, in rooms where the suit's hum covered the treason of tenderness. The word does not ask permission now. It fills his mouth from the inside with a weight that makes other oaths sound light. This is how choices actually happen, not in the loud declaration, not at the top of the stairs, but half a thought earlier, when a hand moves by itself because the mind has finally stopped sitting on it. He moves. It is not dramatic. It is not quick. It is not planned. The Emperor registers the shadow late because no one truly believes a machine will disobey its programming after this long. He takes the old man in his arms the way a father takes a child. Only there is no tenderness in the lift, only decision turned into leverage. Lightning pours through the circuit of all three of them for a second that contains a decade. The light writes on armor what fire wrote on flesh years ago, adding new letters to the alphabet of pain. The room becomes a negative of itself, the windows black, the boy pale, the emperor a coil unwinding, and then motion finishes the thought, and gravity receives its tithe. The fall is long enough to feel like an answer. Silence lands a moment later, heavier than bodies dot. He stands there smoking in small, efficient lines. The breath goes on because the machinery insists. The machinery is losing the argument. He feels systems failing the way a storm feels a ship breaking up inside it. Sectional, inevitable, at odds with will. The boy crawls toward him with the stubborn persistence of someone who refuses to let the scene write itself without his sentence included. "Help me," he hears, and it is not the Emperor speaking through velvet. It is a request without leverage. He laughs once, not mockery, surprise. And the laugh sounds like an old door in a house that has been shut too long. He asks for nothing. That is important. He does not barter. He does not say, "I told you so," to a future that refused his hand. He asks only for air without the mask between it and his skin. The boy's face makes the promise before his mouth can form it. Hands that just now clutched emptiness find latches and seals and the delicate choreography of reversing a birth. The helmet lifts, the tunnel of the world opens, and raw air lands on a face that was told it would never be touched again by anything but filters and fire. He inhales as if the room might be different in its own atmosphere. It is. It contains the boy Dot. But that belongs to another page. Here, on the narrow bridge between lightning and quiet, he discovers the oldest secret hiding under every machine that ever kept him alive. There is a kind of choice made without oxygen. A choice that oxygen could only have explained away with reasons too tidy to be true. He did not decide because prophecy told him to. He did not decide because argument beat him. He decided because a child refused hatred, and because the echo of that refusal matched a sound he thought the suit had crushed. The ember in his chest, banked for years under metal and orders, exhaled. The tide turned a finger's width and took the rest with it. Dot. Alarms begin to notice the ship's hunger for departure. The throne, empty, learns humility. The windows hold a war they can no longer stage manage. He leans, suddenly small inside a large machine, and the boy steadies him with hands that haven't learned to be afraid of what they're all holding. "It's over," the boy says, and for once the sentence is not a verdict, but a mercy, permission to stop being the gravest thing in every room. He takes one more filtered breath and then asks for the world without filters, because that is the only way to tell the truth with his own mouth. Lightning still crawls his nerves like a late apology. He lets it. The narrow bridge he has just crossed retreats behind him, unlit now, unnecessary. Ahead is a different crossing made of wood and smoke and a night sky. Between them, this pause, the quiet where the galaxy learns to listen to a machine that has changed its mind. Smoke thins like a tired veil, and beyond it the stars arrange themselves into the kind of order only distance can provide. The floor shivers with alarms that have lost their reason for shouting, and the throne room's hard geometry feels suddenly embarrassed by its own certainty. He sits smaller inside a machine built to make him large, and the boy, no, the sun, kneels close enough for the human weather of breath to matter again. The request is simple and absolute, the kind of sentence that removes scaffolding from every other sentence. Let me look on you with my own eyes. There are rituals for everything in the Empire. Doors, addresses, deaths, but not for this. The son's hands learn the rite as they perform it. Thumb on latch, a turn that feels like reversing time, a lift that makes the room tilt because air enters where law used to be. The helmet comes away with a reluctance that is more memory than friction, and the world, unfiltered, touches him like a shy relative, stunned to find the face still here after rumor declared it gone, that the first breath without the mask is not triumphant. It is thin and raw, the way a winter breath is when lungs must relearn how to accept cold. He inhales the boy, metal, cloth, fear he refuses to perform, hope he refuses to name, and the boy inhales him, and for a blink that is larger than any clock will admit, their timing is one rhythm, not master and pupil, not hunter and quarry, not instrument and order, but father and child, learning the tempo of truth. The face beneath is a map of places fire walked through and did not leave willingly. It is also a map of the boy's features, carried forward and weathered back to him. Eyes that once looked up at ships from sand look now across inches of air and find an answer that requires no argument. He wants to apologize for his unmasked self, the ruin, the scars, the years that carved him into topography instead of portrait. But apology is a lesser language, and there is no time to conjugate it. Instead, he says the name the galaxy forgot to call him, and hears it fit inside the boy's mouth like it was waiting there, like it had made space among all the newer syllables. He adds a confession that is not a defense and not a plea, only a straight line drawn through a tangle. You were right about me sooner than I was. The boy answers with a forgiveness that does not erase the ledger. It simply puts the pen down. He did not save his father because of arithmetic. He saved him because love, when it chooses, does not ask interest. The suit complains in small, insistent voices. Systems fail with the dignity of old servants who do not wish to be witnessed lying down. He feels the edges of himself losing detail, as if the world were stepping one pace back to see the whole painting. It does not frighten him. Fear, that old tutor, is late to class today and finds the lesson already learned. He has spent so long being the narrowest thing in every room, the point at which choices ended, that becoming wide feels like a relief. He looks at the boy and discovers he can still be precise where it matters. "Tell your sister you were right," he says, making a bridge out of a sentence between two shores he can not stand on at once. The boy nods with the gravity of someone taking possession not of an order, but of an inheritance, to carry forward a truth without letting it turn into a weapon. There is a soft, unremarkable noise only he hears, the interior bell that signals a life exiting on a schedule finally its own. He smiles not widely. His face doesn't have that geometry anymore, but with a warmth that refuses tragedy's favorite pose. The boy leans closer without thinking, the way children do when the person in front of them becomes more important than the posture they meant to keep. A hand, stripped of glove and history, lifts and shakes, then steadies in the cradle of a younger palm. Skin to skin is a technology older than all empires. It runs without power, without permission, without explanation. It says what no device can freight. "You are held," he asks to see the boy clearly one last time, and the room obeys. Details sharpen. The notch on a brow earned in a corridor that tried to teach him humility. The stubborn line of a mouth that would rather choose difficulty than lie to itself. The ridiculous necessary hope gathered at the corners of his eyes, like dew stubbornly forming after drought. He thinks with a wryness that tastes like home. So much of me survived in you, but the parts you added are the ones that will save you. He does not say this aloud. Saying would make it a demand. He has run out of demands and discovers he does not miss them. Outside, the war remembers to continue. Inside, the father remembers to stop. There is no drama to the ending, only a narrowing of the aperture, a dimming of the edges, a choice to let go that is not surrender, but completion. He has been unfinished for so long he did not know the word belonged to him. Now, with the boy's hand under his own like shore under tide, the last piece clicks. The breath, that metronome he once mistook for a sentence, counts a final bar and sets the baton down. The face, newly rebuilt into the simplest expression, gratitude without ornament, learns stillness. After the mask sits beside the sun like an artifact from a conquered era, glossy, speechless, suddenly too heavy for its small share of table. He looks at it and does not hate it. It kept a man alive long enough to choose. He places it with care and covers the face with more care still, because dignity is a ritual you perform for the living as much as the dead. The evacuation proceeds around him like weather. Techs triaging power, pilots arguing about vectors, friends arriving to discover grief and relief can stand shoulder to shoulder without fighting. He moves through the tasks that remain as if lifting them with both arms, and the ship learns a new version of his determination, not rage's straight line, but devotion's curved dot. The pyre waits under trees that haven't learned to be suspicious. Night leans close without eavesdropping. Wood, honest as ever, accepts its job. He lays the body upon the prepared bed and steps back. Not far, just far enough to give the moment room to breathe. Fire approaches like a respected guest and touches the cloth with the courtesy due, an ending. It climbs, slow first, then certain, and the air changes its mind about what it will carry. Smoke, yes, and also the precise way a life withdraws without fuss when given permission to be finished. People gather at the edge of the light and offer their silence, which is the only correct currency here. Some knew the man, some knew the mask, some knew only the shadow cast by both. All know now what it is to witness weight set down. He watches the flames. Do what flames have always done. Argue with matter until both agree to become brightness. He does not picture a boyhood or a throne room or a desert. He lets the scenes rest. Instead, he pays attention to small things, how sparks lift and then choose a star to imitate, how heat reveals currents in the night you cannot see in daylight, how the wood seams and pops like a language nearly understood. He thinks, not with words, that redemption is less a door than a window. You do not pass through. You look out and are changed by what you decide to see. The window in him is open. The view is a circle of friends, a figure in gold who will tell stories that comfort without lying, a sister whose strength is not a mirror of his, but a complement, a future that will be messy and therefore alive. When the fire lowers to a conversation instead of a speech, he steps forward and adds the last small branch he carried in his hand without noticing. It flares briefly as new contributions do, and then joins the work of returning. He says nothing. Saying would be for him, and the moment deserves a louder silence. Somewhere nearby, a creature calls and is answered. The planet keeps its appointments. The stars stay up late to watch. He feels the weight in his chest altering, not vanishing but redistributing into places his body can carry without bending. Grief is a craftsman. Given time, it builds rooms where memory can sit comfortably without knocking things over. When he turns away, it is not to escape the sight, but to share it with the others who could not come close yet needed to be near. Faces turn, and in them he sees what courage looks like after the theater ends. Eyes that agree to stay open. He stands with them until the night decides a boundary and pushes them gently back to their beds, their guard posts, their tasks. Sleep, when it finally visits, will bring images that crush and comfort at once. Morning will be a workday. This is how the galaxy mends, not with proclamations, but with hands washing, with engines checked, with a small laugh that does not feel like treason when it breaks free. Later, alone, under a thinner sky, he will look up and say the name once more, not because the man might hear it, but because the saying places the name where it now belongs, among lights. He will think of embers under snow, heat protected by cold, flame that survived because winter taught it patience, and understand that what leaves is not always lost, and what stays is not always a chain. The mask, stored now with a reverence that is not worship, will be a warning and a promise. Warnings for the kind of power that forgets to ask why. Promises for the kind of love that refuses to be efficient. He will close his eyes and count 3 breaths, one for the boy he was, one for the father he found, one for the man he must be because of both. And when he opens them, the world will still be there, waiting, ordinary, worth protecting. The pyre cools by morning into a geometry of ash that the wind edits all day. Footprints cross and soften. Somewhere a child hears a story that ends not with a victory shout, but with a quiet yes. He pockets that yes for later and steps into the work, the ember in his chest no longer needing to burn high to be real, the snow above it learning that shelter can be warmth if you listen correctly. The final look does not fade. It becomes a compass, and the night, no longer frightened of the mask or the face, makes room for both in the sky. After the fire withdraws and the night closes its eyes, the galaxy opens its drawers. People who were quiet while the breath still counted begin to speak. People who spoke too loudly go silent and listen for a different rhythm. What remains is not just ash. Remains never are. There are objects, metal that held a life together long enough for it to choose, devices that translated intention into consequence, rooms that kept their agreements with silence even when filled with noise. There are also stories, the ones told in small kitchens over cups that steam and in hangars where the air smells like ozone and money, the ones told to frighten, to comfort, to recruit, to sell. Relics and rumors begin their slow mutual orbit, iron-pulling language, language polishing iron, each making the other brighter or darker depending on the hand that turns it in the light. Some things were never meant to be found. He knew this and acted accordingly. Long before the pyre, in years when the suit's hum was the last word in most rooms, he hid keys inside labyrinths no one else knew were labyrinths, caches behind blast-baked stone on a planet that likes to eat maps. A vault whose lock is not mechanical, but musical. Openable only by a phrase played at a tempo few could keep. A drawer carved into the underside of a desk that will dissolve its contents rather than be pried by impatience. In each he placed something he did not trust himself to destroy. A shard of crystal that remembers a voice. A schematic that might show a hand how to follow his. A journal written not with confession. There are also stories, the ones told in small kitchens over cups that steam and in hangars where the air smells like ozone and money. The ones told to frighten, to comfort, to recruit, to sell. Relics and rumors begin their slow mutual orbit, iron-pulling language, language polishing iron, each making the other brighter or darker depending on the hand that turns it in the light dot. Some things were never meant to be found. He knew this and acted accordingly. Long before the pyre, in years when the suit's hum was the last word in most rooms, he hid keys inside labyrinths no one else knew were labyrinths, caches behind blast-baked stone on a planet that likes to eat maps. A vault whose lock is not but with instruction for a student he feared might someday resemble what he had been. He set traps not to maim curiosity, but to tax it, to exhaust the hunger that does not understand the cost of eating. He told himself this was prudence, mechanical but musical. Openable only by a phrase played at a tempo few could keep. A drawer carved into the underside of a desk that will dissolve its contents rather than be pried by impatience. In each he placed something he did not trust himself to destroy. A shard of crystal that remembers a voice. A schematic that might show a hand how to follow his. A journal written not with confession, but with instruction for a student he feared might someday resemble what he had been. He set traps not to maim curiosity, but to tax it, to exhaust the hunger that does not understand the cost of eating. He told himself this was prudence. On a world of forests by a boy who wanted to wear thunder as a crown one day. Some said the mask was divided among 3 temples so that no single obsession could put it back together. Some said the mask returned to the river that gave him his iron breath and sank without leaving ripples. All 3 were useful to someone. All 3 felt true in the way good lies do, close enough to the outline to let the mind fill in the rest. In barracks where the old regime still practiced its parade steps in secret, young men and women touched copied plates as if touching them would place iron in their own spines. In cells where resistance now had to learn governance, old fighters shook their heads and reminded the young that fear can be efficient and still be wrong. There are places where architecture keeps echoes as a hobby. On a Star Destroyer mothballed rather than scrapped, a corridor at shift change still carries the cadence of boots that are not there. A lift hums at a frequency that made men stand straighter once. A hangar bay's lights, when they snap awake, paint a long triangle on the floor exactly the size of a man's shadow in a cape. Crew who never served under him swear they felt watched while inventorying those rooms, swear they heard a breath behind them that could have been duct cycling heat, or could have been the memory of a machine that taught ships and men to inhale at the same time. They bring back small things without meaning to, a wrench that fits nothing they own, a fiber patch marked with a seal now ships and men to inhale at the same time. They bring back small things without meaning to, a wrench that fits nothing they own, a fiber patch marked with a seal now illegal, and put them in drawers they promised to empty. Keeping a token is a way of not letting the past walk around in your head in its full size. That is the story they tell themselves, while fingers learn the habit of touch now illegal, and put them in drawers they promise to empty. Keeping a token is a way of not letting the past walk around in your head in its full size. That is the story they tell themselves, while fingers learn the habit of touch. The Inquisitorius leaves a different kind of relic behind. Records that read like confessions written by people who never learned to feel sorry. Lessons for apprentices who might never be born. Techniques stored as if skill. The Inquisitorius leaves a different kind of relic behind. Records that read like confessions written by people who never learned to feel sorry. Lessons for apprentices who might never be born. Techniques stored as if skill were a neutral thing. Researchers find them, those who catalog history to prevent it from repeating, and rub their eyes after an hour, because instruction written without ethics exhausts. Researchers find them, those who catalog history to prevent it from repeating, and rub their eyes after an hour, because instruction written without ethics exhausts. They stand too close to the edge, because the edge is why they came. Fewer cross into the keep. Those who do learn that silence is heavy in rooms where a single person once decided the speed of whole systems. The fortress does not haunt, not in the way sentimental stories prefer. It refuses. It insists on the discipline it taught its builder. Measured steps, considered doors, the refusal to run. In a vault that has not been opened since the last time breath fogged the inside of a mask, a drawer remembers the weight of a small item and wonders if it will one day be asked to give it back. Drawers have a long view of time. They can wait. There are, inevitably, pilgrims. Not many. The galaxy has too much work to do to indulge large-scale worship, but a trickle flows. Former officers who stand at attention in empty hangars, not saluting so much as attempting to put their spines where their memories tell them they belong. Children of the defeated who try on a tone of voice in mirrors and discover it makes them lonely. Contrarians who build their identity on loving what frightened everyone else. Romantics who believe redemption means consequence was a dream. At the edges of markets, sellers set up tables arranged with symmetry that reads as reverence. Rows of black replicas, breathers that wheeze convincingly, hollows of him striding through smoke framed in alloy that catches barlight. Some buyers feel a thrill that is mostly costume and go home cured by seeing how silly awe can look under fluorescent fixtures. Some buy to keep fear on a leash, a dog they can slap and tell to sit. Some buy to feed an ache they refuse to name. The rebellion, now something like a government, faces a choice about how loudly to curate the past. They know that erasing draws the outline sharper. They know that sacralizing turns a man into a magnet for the kind of souls who need magnets. So they do a quiet thing, which is harder. They teach. In schools that used to be barracks, instructors show a clip of a hallway that becomes a wind and ask students not how frightening it is, but how effective. They point out the places where fear made men obedient and not good. They tell the story of the last choice without ending it with a hymn, trusting the part of the mind that prefers work to worship to carry the weight. In memorial halls, the name is listed among many, neither bolded nor erased, set beside the simplest possible epitaph, chose differently. At the end, people stand there longer than at more polished plaques. A straight sentence can be heavier than a poem. He tried to bury things in himself that the world at the end. People stand there longer than at more polished plaques. A straight sentence can be heavier than a poem. He tried to bury things in himself that the world now digs for. The urge to control and call it care. The pleasure of a plan that no one else is strong enough to refuse. The suspicion that love should come with a handle. Those are the most dangerous relics because they do not need our digs for the urge to control and call it care, the pleasure of a plan that no one else is strong enough to refuse, the suspicion that love should come with a handle. Those are the most dangerous relics because they do not need metal to survive. They wait in anyone who has been praised for competence beyond their years, in anyone whose kindness runs hot enough to scorch, in anyone who has ever told themselves that ends are furniture you can rearrange in metal to survive. They wait in anyone who has been praised for competence beyond their years, in anyone whose kindness runs hot enough to scorch, in anyone who has ever told themselves that ends are furniture you can rearrange to justify certain means. To justify certain means. The rumor that matters most is not about a mask hidden in a forest. It is about the day a man set his jaw and decided not to turn away from a cry that wasn't his. The rumor that matters most is not about a mask hidden in a forest. It is about the day a man set his jaw and decided not to turn away from a cry that wasn't his. That rumor travels quietly, like good news in a season that distrusts announcements. It sits at tables. It gets misquoted. It still works. Somewhere, a drawer opens. Not in the castle, not yet, but in a modest room where a pilot travels quietly, like good news in a season that distrusts announcements. It sits at tables. It gets misquoted. It still works. Somewhere, a drawer opens. Not in the castle, not yet, but in a modest room where a pilot keeps the ordinary debris of survival. Inside is a small, scorched clasp, insignificant to most eyes, irreplaceable to a pattern that refuses to say goodbye carelessly. The pilot holds it and does not feel power or fear, keeps the ordinary debris of survival. Inside is a small, scorched clasp, insignificant to most eyes, irreplaceable to a pattern that refuses to say goodbye carelessly. The pilot holds it and does not feel power or fear. Pollock leans under a wind that keeps its promises. Insects perform their small professionalism. A stream nearby practices clarity in its spare time. No monuments here, no plinths or positions. Only a piece of ground that remembers boots and bare feet and isn't fussy about the difference. The sun chooses places like this now when the calendar allows. An afternoon with a hum taken out of it. A horizon that doesn't ask for speeches. He walks until the workday inside him releases its grip, sits where the sun makes the earth smell like bread, and listens to the quiet the way a mechanic used to listen to an engine, alert not for trouble but for harmony. The war left him with a chest full of echoes. Fields teach him which ones to keep and which to let run out to the fence and fade. What stayed after the war isn't the theatrics. Hallway footage went to archives. Thunderous declarations got filed under lessons. Maps were folded into history's drawers. What stayed were the habits people learned when spectacles stopped being useful. A pilot who used to be brave with fuel now lands softer than he needs to, just to prove he can. A senator who once sharpened questions like knives now asks one less, then listens a beat longer. A farm kid who traced starfighters on his school slate now draws irrigation lines, careful with slope and shade. The sun pays attention to these quiet evolutions with a gratitude that refuses glitter. He knows victory can be loud, but settling is quiet work. Hands on hinges, patches on roofs, a laugh that no longer sounds like defiance. He keeps a few objects without letting them become altars. A belt clasp, cleaned of soot, but not of memory. A fragment of crystal that sings only if asked kindly. A cloak pin that holds closed the collar of a jacket mended 3 times. He puts them where they can be seen and then learns not to stare. The point isn't to fix the past in glass. The point is to let the past be an honest weight so the present doesn't blow away in the first stiff wind. When visitors come, children mostly, with questions shaped like planets, he does not begin with lightning or thrones. He begins with kitchens, how choices are first made where water boils and someone is 10 minutes late and love has to decide between lecture and welcome. He has learned that heroism is easier to teach if you don't name it that dot. He thinks of his sister often, not because she needs his thinking to be fierce, but because thinking of her adjusts his own compass. She does in council chambers what he tries to do in fields, make the air easier to breathe. They share a discipline that was not inherited so much as agreed upon, answers without flourish, plans that remember tomorrow, a refusal to use fear even when fear is efficient. When they argue, it is about pace. She knows institutions must turn like ships, broad and a little stubborn. He still wants certain doors to open at the speed of a hand on a latch. Their disagreements end in laughter more and more. A practice run for a galaxy where disagreement isn't a prologue to breaking dot. There are days the old pain taps on the window like rain. A corridor in a maintenance bay throws a shadow in a shape he knows too well. A clamp snaps with the same report his mind gave a different snap years ago. An apprentice sets his jaw at a familiar angle, and he feels an unearned worry rise like heat. He does not swat such moments away. He opens the window and lets them in, offers them water, hears them out, thanks them for their warning. Then he shows them the door. This isn't forgetting, it's custodianship. What stayed after the war is not a mandate to be happy. It's permission to be thorough with sorrow without letting it run the house. He teaches, though he would never call it a school. A hangar corner earns a nickname, the porch, because people wander there for shade and leave with a new way of holding their temper. He tells young ones the kinds of stories that are usefully unexciting. How a breath can fix the wobble in a hand faster than pride can. How a blade means you owe the room more attention, not less. How the Force answers questions framed as care and resists questions framed as control. When asked the old question, what did he say when the mask came off, he tells the truth and stops before explanation. Explanation would be for him. The truth is for them. A request to deliver a message. A look that turned a room into a home for exactly as long as it needed to be. The galaxy doesn't ask for perfection now. It asks for maintenance. Treaties that don't leak. Roads that turn to meet the village instead of expecting the village to move. Courts that can tell the difference between a mistake and malice. He finds he likes mending better than winning. Winning feels like a period. Mending is a semicolon that lets the sentence breathe and continue. On supply runs, he buys nails and stories in equal measure. On long nights, he stands on a balcony and identifies constellations by their older names. Farm names, sailor names, the ones that tell you what weather is coming rather than which ancient noble claimed the sky. What stayed after the war is a certain way of holding power, with 2 fingers like a fragile cup, so that spilling teaches you to carry better instead of to grip harder. He practices it until it becomes a body memory. Sometimes in a council that is more noise than signal, he places his hand on the table the way a pilot settles a ship in wind. Calm, weight distributed, no sudden moves. Sometimes in a crowd that begins to turn his face into a screen for their hopes, he steps back so someone else can take the light. The lesson the mask taught him at the end refuses to be buried. Certainty should make room. He visits places that used to flinch. A factory town where the whistle once synchronized fear to shift change now blows for lunch and jokes. A temple hill where footsteps learn to hush now hosts a market where fruit vendors argue politely about sweetness. On Mustafar he does not land. That is a field someone else must choose. He sends a weather report instead. Gale warnings, ash advisories, a note that says simply "not today" when surveyors ask. Respect is a kind of repair. You don't always have to touch a scar to care for it. In the quiet field, season to season, the metaphors he used need relax into ground and sky. The ember in his chest is just warmth now, not an alarm. The tide is only weather, a rise and fall he trusts. Echoes live where they belong, in memory, not in command. He eats an apple that is only an apple. He counts 3 breaths that are only breaths. He lets the sun go down without making it a symbol. Then he stands, brushes grass from his knees, and returns to the hangar, to the porch, to the council, to the map of errands and kindness that replaced the old star charts. What stayed after the war is small and sturdy. It is a field that grows food and a habit of saying you first when a door is narrow. It is a mask on a shelf and a story told without heat. It is the sound of engines tuned to service rather than chase. It is a father's face in a son's life as a compass rather than a demand. It is a breath taken before speaking and another after, and the knowledge that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do for a galaxy is to make a day that does not need saving. Night settles without insisting, a soft dark that does not erase so much as loosen, and in it the stars keep an old promise: to be present, to be patient, to be there whether we look up or keep our eyes closed and remember the shape of their light. We have walked a long way together, sand and stone and iron and ash, halls that learned a rhythm and rooms that practicing silence, bridges narrow enough to cross only once and fields wide enough to rest in. And now the story puts down its pack and takes one last slow breath. The ember we carried has cooled to warmth that does not demand. The tide that pulled and returned has become the easy rise and fall of a body ready for sleep. The echo that followed us through corridors and years has thinned to a hush that feels like a blanket rather than a bell. You have listened well. The galaxy, which is only another word for distance learning how to shine, listens back. If your mind wanders, as good minds do, let it roam along the gentler paths. A boy counting stars through a desert window, a steady hand fixing a stubborn machine. The calm geometry of a blade moved with care rather than hunger. Let it walk past the rooms where decisions had sharp edges and choose the ones with chairs and a quiet lamp. A table set with tokens that mean survival rather than conquest. A balcony that faces the night without asking for victory. A keep that learned to be a monastery when rage grew tired. Somewhere in those rooms a mask sits where it cannot command, and a name sits where it can be spoken softly. Somewhere in those rooms you can hear the sound that never learned how to frighten anyone. A breath arriving, a breath leaving, a breath counting its own gentle work. All stories about shadow are, in the end, stories about light learning to be patient. The figure we followed wore iron not to become a legend, but to survive long enough to make one choice that was louder than a lifetime of noise. He made it, and the quiet that followed did not erase the years. It arranged them. If you need a compass, keep that one. Not perfection, not purity, just a hand moving without permission toward the necessary good. Keep, too, the smaller inheritances, the way fear can be efficient, but never kind. The way power sits better when held with 2 fingers. The way a hallway becomes safer when someone chooses to leave one person breathing so that tomorrow has a witness. These are modest stars, easy to carry. They travel well into dreams. Now. Comma, if it helps. Bring the night a little closer. Feel the mattress remember you, the pillow shaping itself to your quiet. Let your jaw slacken the way doors do when a house is certain it is loved. We will count 3 things and then let counting continue without us. 1. The ember, steady, uncomplicated. 2. The tide, a slow shore against your ribs. 3. The echo, already fading into comfort. With each number, the room grows warmer and the ceiling taller until the sky fits inside it. Constellations rearranging themselves into a story that does not need words. If a stray worry taps the window like a moth, thank it for its vigilance and let it rest on the sill. Night has the watch. Tomorrow will be ordinary in the best possible way. Engines will ask to be tuned. Friends will ask to be heard. Maps will ask to be redrawn to include a shortcut someone found between kindness and courage. You do not have to solve any of it now. The work waits well when asked politely. For this hour there is only breath, yours answering the galaxies, and a long slope down into sleep. Picture the field at the end of our journey, if you like. Grass leaning, stream practicing clarity. A sky that keeps everyone's secrets without forgetting their names. Picture, if you prefer, the window of a quiet ship where the stars line up like small promises and keep them simply by being there. We have arrived at the place stories hope to become. Not an ending, not even a beginning. Just a room where what mattered can sit without armor and be recognized without ceremony. If you need one last image to carry with you, let it be a hand unclasping, not to drop anything, but to rest, and the subtle relief that follows when a weight agrees to stand up on its own. Or let it be only this: the breath, steady, the heart, unhurried, the night, kind. When the credits roll in a distant theater, you will not see. When the halls dim in a fortress that learned to listen. When the field collects a little dew, you will not step in until morning. This moment will continue by itself, exactly as you left it. Quiet kept true. So close your eyes. Let the last edges soften. The stars are doing their gentle work. You have done yours. Good night.